Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first thing I noticed about the house was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that city dwellers romanticize when they dream of countryside escapes, but something thicker, more deliberate. A silence that seemed to press against my eardrums like cotton soaked in cold water. I had signed the lease 3 days prior, barely glancing at the fine print, desperate to escape the grinding machinery of urban existence that had worn my nerves to exposed filaments. The real estate agent, a gaunt woman with fingers that never stopped moving, had mentioned something about the previous owner leaving abruptly. I hadn't asked why. I should have asked why. The house sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through overgrown fields like a scar through flesh. Victorian in structure, though decades of neglect had softened its edges into something organic, as if the building were slowly being digested by the surrounding woods. The paint had long since surrendered to the elements, leaving the wooden siding the color of old bone. 3 stories tall, with windows that caught the dying afternoon light and held it in ways that made them look like jaundiced eyes. I loved it immediately. That first night, I walked through each room with the enthusiasm of a man who had finally found sanctuary. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, announcing my presence to the empty rooms ahead. I counted 7 doors on the ground floor alone. The front entrance, the back door leading to a collapsed porch, the basement door with its rusted padlock, and 4 interior doors separating the kitchen, dining room, parlor, and a small study. I closed each one as I passed, savoring the solid click of latches engaging, the simple satisfaction of boundaries established. I slept deeply that night, dreamlessly, the kind of sleep I hadn't experienced in years. When I woke, pale morning light was filtering through moth-eaten curtains, and I felt something I had almost forgotten existed: peace. Then I walked downstairs. Every door stood open, not just ajar, fully deliberately open, as if someone had walked through each room and pushed them to their widest extent. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and stared. The logical explanation arrived quickly. Old house, warped frames, doors that couldn't hold themselves closed. I had read about such things. Houses settle, wood expands and contracts. There was nothing sinister about physics. But as I moved through the ground floor, closing each door again with perhaps more force than necessary, I noticed the marks. Faint smudges along the edges of the doors, concentrated around the handles and the wood at roughly shoulder height. Dark marks, like dried mud or ash, arranged in patterns that my mind kept trying to interpret as handprints before I could stop it. I spent that morning scrubbing. The marks came off easily enough, revealing the pale wood beneath, and I told myself a story about the previous owner, about neglect and dirt and nothing more unusual than poor housekeeping. By noon, the doors were clean. By evening, I had forgotten the marks entirely, lost in the satisfying work of unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. I closed every door before bed. I checked each one twice. The second morning, they were open again. The marks had returned. This time I examined them more closely, pressing my own palm against the wood for comparison. The prints were smaller than mine, the fingers slightly splayed, the texture grainy and irregular. Not mud, I realized. The substance crumbled slightly under my nail when I scraped it. Soil, mixed with something organic. Decomposed leaves, perhaps, or something else I chose not to name. I installed new latches that afternoon, driving screws into wood that accepted them with unsettling ease, as if the house had been waiting for this response. Slide bolts on every interior door, the kind that required deliberate action to open. I tested each one repeatedly, yanking on handles, pushing with my full weight. They held. Of course they held. They were solid metal against solid wood. That night, I lay awake, listening. The house made sounds in the darkness, creaks and pops that I cataloged as thermal contraction, the settling of ancient joists. But beneath those expected noises, I thought I heard something else. A soft, rhythmic whisper, like fabric sliding against fabric, moving through the rooms below me. I told myself it was the wind finding gaps in the old windows. I told myself houses breathed at night, expanding and contracting like sleeping animals. I told myself a lot of things in those early weeks. Morning came, and the doors stood open. The slide bolts, every single one, had been drawn back, the metal smooth and unforced. The handprints were darker now, more numerous, covering not just the handles but spreading across the door surfaces in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Almost like writing in a language I couldn't read. I began sleeping poorly. The silence of the house, which had initially seemed like a blessing, now pressed against me with weight and intention. I found myself straining to hear sounds that weren't there, or perhaps were there but existed at frequencies just beyond my perception. Sometimes, in the heavy hours before dawn, I would catch fragments of something. Breathing, maybe, or whispered words spoken in rooms I couldn't reach. The neighbor who lived 2 miles down the road came by in my third week. A weathered man with calloused hands and eyes that looked slightly past me when he spoke. He had heard someone had finally moved into the old place, he said. He seemed surprised I was still there. When I asked what he meant, he changed the subject, talking about property lines and whose responsibility it was to maintain the drainage ditches between our lands. But as he was leaving, his truck already running, he leaned out the window and asked if I slept well at night. I lied and said yes. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected exactly that answer, and drove away without another word. I started documenting the handprints. I photographed them each morning, measuring their size, noting their positions, looking for patterns. The marks appeared in different locations each night, sometimes concentrated on a single door, other times spread evenly throughout the house. They always appeared overnight. They were always fresh, still slightly damp to the touch in those earliest morning hours. And they were multiplying. By the 4th week, I counted over 60 individual prints on the door leading to the basement alone. The basement door remained locked. I had reinforced the padlock with a chain and a combination lock, and each morning I checked both before examining anything else. They were always secure. The door itself was always closed, the only door in the house that remained that way. But the handprints clustered around it, covering the wood in overlapping layers, reaching toward the lock but never quite touching it. I stopped inviting the few acquaintances I had made in town to visit. I stopped leaving the house during daylight hours. I found myself sitting in the kitchen each night, watching the doors I had closed, waiting to see them move. They never did while I watched. Whatever opened them waited until I blinked, until I looked away, until exhaustion finally dragged me into fitful sleep despite my efforts to resist. The doctors I eventually consulted, first one in the nearby town, then a specialist in the city I had fled, spoke of stress, of isolation, of the mind's capacity to create external symptoms for internal turmoil. They used words like projection and fugue state. They asked about my sleep patterns, my eating habits, whether I had a history of sleepwalking. I answered honestly. I did not mention the handprints. I had tried to photograph them, to document evidence, but the images never captured what I saw. The pictures showed doors. Just doors. Clean, unmarked wood. I know what you're thinking. I thought it too, in those moments of clarity that came less and less frequently as the weeks wore on. I considered the possibility that I was opening the doors myself, that some fractured part of my psyche was rising in the night to perform rituals I couldn't remember. I set up cameras. I tied thread between door and frame. I sprinkled flour on the floors to catch footprints. The cameras showed nothing. Static, glitches, hours of empty darkness punctuated by brief moments of visual distortion that could have been anything or nothing. The threads were always snapped, and the flour showed footprints, yes, but only mine, walking in patterns I didn't remember, circling the basement door again and again in spirals that tightened toward that padlocked entrance like water draining toward a black hole. I stopped sleeping. Coffee became my blood, and I kept every light in the house burning through the night, convinced that illumination would somehow ward off whatever forces were at work. The handprints continued to appear. They grew darker. They spread to the walls, the window frames, the underside of my furniture. They appeared in places I couldn't reach, on ceilings and in corners where no human hand could press. The shape of them changed too, though so gradually that I almost didn't notice. The fingers elongated, the palms widened. What had once seemed merely small now appeared distorted, stretched, wrong in ways that made my stomach clench when I looked too closely. Last night, or was it the night before, time has become slippery in this place. I heard something new, not whispers, not the sliding sound of movement through empty rooms, scratching, methodical and patient, coming from the basement door, coming from the other side. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard what might have been breathing, what might have been words, what might have been my own pulse echoing in my skull, amplified by exhaustion and fear into something it wasn't. I am writing this at the kitchen table. It is morning, I think. The light through the window seems wrong, too yellow, too thick, but it is light nonetheless. Every door in the house stands open. The handprints cover every surface now, overlapping in layers so dense that the original wood is invisible beneath them. They lead in patterns that spiral toward the basement door, which alone remains closed. But the padlock is gone. The chain lies coiled on the floor, its links intact, unopened. The door itself has begun to bulge outward, the wood warping as if something on the other side were pressing against it with tremendous, patient pressure. I should leave. I know this. I have known it for weeks, perhaps from the very first morning when I found those doors standing open in silent defiance of every lock I had engaged. But when I try to walk toward the front entrance, my feet carry me instead toward the basement. When I try to think about the outside world, about the city I fled, about the life I abandoned, my thoughts slide away like water off glass, redirected toward that single closed door and what might wait beyond it. Tonight, I think I will open it. Or perhaps I already have, in one of those dark hours I cannot remember, those gaps in time that have grown wider and more frequent. Perhaps I have been opening it every night, climbing down into whatever waits below, and returning with soil under my fingernails and someone else's handprints staining my palms. I just looked at my hands, really looked at them for the first time in days. The fingers seem longer than I remember. The palms seem wider, and there is something beneath my nails, dark, organic, crumbling, that I cannot identify and cannot stop touching. The basement door is calling me, not in words, in something older than words. I think I have always been walking toward it. I think I have always been here, in this house, waiting to remember what I buried beneath the floor before I forgot my own name. The handprints on the walls are my handprints. They have always been my handprints, haven't they? Story 2. The first time I heard my name through the intercom, I assumed it was a prank. Some bored teenager pressing buttons at random, maybe a delivery driver with the wrong apartment. The clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m., its red digits casting a faint glow across the ceiling. I lay still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway 3 blocks away. The intercom crackled once more, then fell silent. I didn't get up. There was no reason to. The second time happened 4 nights later. The same hour, give or take a few minutes. My name spoken clearly, with no hesitation or questioning inflection. Just a statement, a fact, as if someone were reading it off a list. I pushed myself out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and shuffled to the small screen mounted near my front door. The camera feed showed the lobby, empty, sterile, lit by the same flickering fluorescent tube that the building manager had promised to replace for 6 months now. No one stood at the panel. No shadow retreated through the glass doors. I told myself it was interference, old wiring. The building was constructed in the 70s, and everything about it felt tired, from the groaning elevator to the rust stains in the bathtub. Sounds traveled strangely through the walls. My upstairs neighbor's footsteps sometimes sounded like they were coming from inside my own closet. But the voice didn't sound like interference. It sounded close, intimate even, like someone whispering directly into my ear while standing just behind me. I started keeping a notebook by the bed. Dates, times, duration of each incident. The scientist in me, I work in data analysis, spend my days drowning in spreadsheets and statistical models, needed to find a pattern, some rational explanation I could point to and say, there, you see? Nothing supernatural. Just faulty equipment and an overactive imagination. By the end of the second week, I had logged 11 occurrences, all between 2:45 and 3:30 a.m., all on nights when I'd gone to bed before midnight, all when I was alone, which, since my wife moved out 8 months ago, meant every night. The 12th time was different. The voice said my name, and then it said something else. It told me what I had eaten for dinner. Leftover Thai food, green curry with tofu, reheated in the microwave for exactly 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I had stood at the kitchen counter scrolling through my phone while I ate, not bothering with a plate, spooning it directly from the container. No one could have known that. The blinds had been drawn. I live on the 9th floor. There are no adjacent buildings tall enough to see in, no windows across the air shaft with a clear line of sight. I checked the intercom panel the next morning, running my fingers over the plastic casing, looking for any sign of tampering. The building's security guard, a heavy-set man with tired eyes who always smelled faintly of cigarettes, watched me from his desk in the lobby without comment. When I asked if anyone had reported problems with the system, he shook his head slowly and returned to his crossword puzzle. That night, I stayed awake. I sat in the armchair by the window, a cup of cold coffee growing a film on its surface, and watched the clock. At 3:08 a.m., the intercom clicked on. My name. Then a pause, long enough that I thought it might be over. Then the voice continued. It told me I would spill coffee on my shirt the next morning, that I would take the stairs instead of the elevator, because I would grow impatient waiting, that I would see a woman in a red coat on my way to work and feel a sharp, inexplicable pang of sadness. I wrote it all down, my hand trembling slightly, the pen leaving jagged marks on the paper. In the morning, I was careful. I drank my coffee slowly, held the mug with both hands, stayed seated until I finished. I took the elevator despite the wait. I watched for red coats on my commute, scanning every face, every figure. None of it happened. I felt relief, followed quickly by something worse. Doubt. Had I misheard? Had I invented the details in my half-sleeping state? I pulled out the notebook and reread my notes. The handwriting was cramped, rushed, but legible. The predictions were there, exactly as I remembered them. Maybe I had changed the outcome. Maybe by knowing what was supposed to happen, I had prevented it. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel like I was being tested. The voice came every night after that. Sometimes it spoke of the past, things I had done decades ago, memories I had buried so deep I had almost convinced myself they never happened. The lie I told my father the last time I saw him before his stroke. The money I stole from a roommate in college and never returned. The way I had stood in my kitchen 6 months after my wife left, holding a bottle of sleeping pills, counting them one by one before putting them back in the cabinet. Other times it spoke of the future, small things mostly, a conversation I would have with a colleague, a song that would be playing in the coffee shop, a stain on the sidewalk outside my building that I would step over without thinking. These predictions came true, every single one. I started testing them, trying to deviate from the script. If the voice said I would take the bus, I walked. If it said I would order a sandwich, I ordered soup. But the outcomes remained the same, just shifted slightly. The person I was supposed to meet on the bus appeared on the street corner instead. The soup came with bread that tasted exactly like the sandwich would have. I couldn't escape what the voice knew I would do. My sleep deteriorated. I stopped eating regular meals, stopped returning calls from concerned colleagues. The woman from Human Resources sent me an email asking if everything was all right, noting that my productivity had declined. I typed a response assuring her I was fine, just dealing with some personal matters, but my fingers hesitated over the keys. The voice had told me I would send that exact message word for word. I deleted the draft. I wrote something different, aggressive, almost rude. I hit send before I could reconsider. The next morning, the intercom told me I had sent an angry email and would regret it. that I would apologize within 2 days, that she would forgive me, but would never look at me the same way again. I stopped leaving my apartment. The days blurred together. I kept the blinds closed, the lights off. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, eating crackers from a stale box, drinking water straight from the tap. The intercom continued its nightly ritual. My name, then the prophecies, growing longer, more detailed. It knew things about me that I had never spoken aloud, thoughts that existed only in the private theater of my own skull. It knew about the recurring dream I'd had since childhood, the one where I stand in a hallway lined with doors, all of them identical, all of them locked. It knew about the persistent itch behind my left ear that no doctor had ever been able to explain. It knew about the way I sometimes caught my reflection in windows and didn't recognize the face staring back. I began to wonder if the voice was mine, not a future version of me, not a ghost or a demon, but something that had always been there, buried beneath the surface of my conscious mind. A part of me that had been watching, recording, waiting for the right moment to speak. The thought was somehow worse than any supernatural explanation. I called my wife, my ex-wife. It was the first time we had spoken in months. Her voice was guarded, careful, the way you might speak to someone standing too close to a ledge. I told her about the intercom, about the predictions, about the feeling that I was being unraveled from the inside out. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked if I had been taking my medication. I hadn't. I had stopped months ago, when the prescription ran out and I couldn't muster the energy to schedule an appointment. The pills had made me feel foggy, distant from my own life, and I had convinced myself I didn't need them anymore. She said she was worried about me, that she thought I should talk to someone, a professional. She offered to come over, to help me find a doctor, to sit with me until I felt better. I almost said yes. The word was on my tongue, warm and desperate. But then I looked at the intercom panel on the wall, its small speaker grill like a mouth waiting to open, and I knew that if she came, the voice would tell me about it first. It would describe her arrival, her concern, her pity. It would transform the visit into another prediction fulfilled, another link in a chain I couldn't break. I told her I was fine, that I would call her soon, that I appreciated her concern. The line went dead. I wasn't sure which one of us had hung up. That night, the intercom spoke earlier than usual, 1:47 a.m. I was still awake, sitting in the darkness of my living room, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. My name came through the speaker, and then a longer pause than I had ever heard before. I held my breath, counting the seconds. When the voice finally continued, it spoke slowly, deliberately, as if choosing each word with care. It told me that I would go to the roof tomorrow, that I would stand at the edge and look down at the street below, that I would feel the wind on my face, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of exhaust and wet concrete, that I would stay there for exactly 17 minutes, and then it told me what I would do after. I didn't write it down. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. I sat frozen in the chair, the words echoing in my skull, trying to decide if I had heard what I thought I heard, or if my mind was finally irrevocably breaking. The intercom clicked off. The apartment fell silent. I'm sitting here now, the notebook open on my lap, the pen motionless between my fingers. The clock reads 4:32 a.m. In a few hours the sun will rise and I will have to decide what to do. The voice has never been wrong. Every prediction, every prophecy has come true. I have tried to fight it, to deviate, to prove that I still have control over my own choices. But maybe that's the cruelest trick of all. Maybe the voice doesn't predict the future. Maybe it creates it. Maybe by hearing what I will do, I become unable to do anything else. Or maybe there is no voice. Maybe the intercom has been silent all along, and everything I've heard has been coming from inside my own head. A fracture in my psyche, a splinter of self that broke off somewhere in the darkness and now whispers to me in the small hours of the night. I don't know which possibility frightens me more. The intercom sits on the wall, mute and ordinary. I can see it from where I'm sitting, its plastic casing yellowed with age, its buttons faded from years of use. It looks like it has never spoken a word, but I know that tonight it will call my name again. And I know that eventually I will have to answer. The question I can't stop asking myself, the one that keeps me awake long after the voice has fallen silent, is simple. When I go to the roof tomorrow, and I will go, I can feel the certainty of it settling into my bones like ice. Will I be fulfilling a prophecy or making a choice? And does the difference even matter anymore? I close the notebook. I set down the pen. Outside my window, the first gray light of dawn is creeping over the horizon. And somewhere in the building, I hear the intercom in another apartment crackle to life. Someone else's name, someone else's turn, or maybe just more interference. Just old wiring, just the tired bones of this building settling into silence. I listen until it stops. Then I stand up, walk to the door, and press my ear against the intercom panel. Nothing. No sound, no whisper, no breath. But I wait anyway, because the voice told me I would. Story 3. The elevator shuddered between the 7th and 9th floors, and for a moment, I thought the cables had snapped. I'd been working at the Hartwell building for 3 weeks when it first happened. The corporate headquarters occupied floors 1 through 12, a glass and steel monument to pharmaceutical research that smelled perpetually of recycled air and industrial carpet cleaner. I was still learning the layout, still memorizing the faces of colleagues whose names blurred together in an endless parade of introductions. Still grateful, desperately grateful, for the job after 11 months of unemployment. The elevator car lurched to a stop. The digital display above the doors flickered, showing nothing, not a number, not even the usual red glow of its segmented digits. Just darkness where information should have been. Then the doors opened. The corridor beyond was wrong. I knew it immediately, the way you know in dreams that something has shifted beneath the surface of reality. The hallway stretched ahead in a straight line, lit by fluorescent tubes that buzzed and flickered in an arrhythmic pattern, casting everything in a sickly yellow pallor that seemed to drain color from the walls themselves. The carpet was the same industrial gray as every other floor, but darker somehow, as if it had absorbed years of dust and shadow. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, standard office doors, the kind with small rectangular windows at eye level, but none of them bore numbers or nameplates. The air smelled different, stale certainly, but underneath that staleness lurked something else, something organic and faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. I stood frozen in the elevator, my finger hovering over the door close button, watching the hallway. Nothing moved. No sound reached me except the electrical hum of those dying lights, but I felt it. That primitive awareness that evolution carved into our ancestors' brains, the certainty that something in the darkness was watching me. The door slid shut. The elevator resumed its descent as if nothing had happened, and when I stumbled out into the lobby, the security guard at the front desk glanced up from his magazine with the bored expression of someone who'd seen everything and cared about nothing. I tried to explain it to my wife that evening. We sat at our kitchen table, the remains of takeout containers between us, and I described the flickering lights, the unnumbered doors, the impossible wrongness of a floor that shouldn't exist. She listened with that particular patience she reserves for my anxieties, the gentle nodding, the sympathetic murmurs, but I could see the concern creeping into her eyes. Not concern about the building, concern about me. She reminded me that I'd been under stress, that starting a new job after so long without work was bound to play tricks on my mind. That old buildings sometimes had maintenance floors, service levels, nothing sinister about it. I wanted to believe her. The next day, I took the stairs. For 2 weeks, I avoided the elevators entirely. My calves ached from climbing 8 flights twice daily, but the burn felt like penance, like protection. I told myself the experience had been a glitch, A momentary malfunction in the elevator's programming, a trick of exhausted perception. The human brain, after all, is notorious for filling gaps with fiction. But then the emails began. The first one arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between meeting invitations and project updates. The sender field displayed only a string of numbers, 08-00-00. The subject line was blank. The body of the message contained a single sentence. "We noticed you didn't come in." I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking in the reply field, my fingers refusing to type. The IT department, when I finally worked up the courage to ask, found no record of the message in the company system. My colleague in the adjacent cubicle, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd worked there for 7 years, shrugged when I mentioned it. Spam, probably. Spoofed addresses. Nothing to worry about. That night, I dreamed of corridors that stretched forever, doors that opened onto rooms filled with filing cabinets, and filing cabinets filled with folders, and folders filled with pages covered in my own handwriting. Words I didn't remember writing. Reports I didn't remember filing. Employee evaluations for people whose faces I couldn't quite see. I woke at 3 a.m. with the taste of dust in my mouth. The second email arrived 3 days later. Same sender, same blank subject line. "The position remains open. We've kept your desk." I deleted it immediately, then emptied my trash folder, then cleared my browser history for good measure, as if digital hygiene could somehow scrub the wrongness from my computer. My hands were shaking. I noticed distantly that the office around me continued its usual rhythms. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the soft murmur of conversation, while I sat paralyzed at my desk, wondering if I was losing my mind. That afternoon, I broke my self-imposed rule. I took the elevator. I don't know what I expected. Part of me hoped for confirmation, proof that the floor existed, that I hadn't imagined it, that my sanity remained intact. Part of me hoped for the opposite. A smooth ride from the lobby to the 8th floor, nothing unusual, nothing wrong, just another unremarkable journey in an unremarkable building. The elevator stopped between 7 and 9. This time I stepped out. The carpet absorbed my footsteps, muffling them into silence. The fluorescent lights above me flickered in that same irregular pattern, casting my shadow in stuttering fragments against the walls. The air was colder here, not the aggressive chill of air conditioning, but something older, damper, like the breath of a basement that hadn't been opened in years. I walked slowly, counting doors. 12 on the left, 12 on the right. All identical. All windowless, I realized now. The small rectangular panes I'd seen from the elevator had been an illusion, a trick of distance and expectation. Up close, the doors were solid wood, their surfaces scarred with fine scratches that might have been age, or might have been something else entirely. At the end of the corridor stood a larger door, slightly ajar. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to return to the elevator, to press the button for any other floor, to pretend I'd never set foot in this impossible place. But the emails had done something to me. They'd planted a seed of desperate curiosity, a need to understand what was happening before it consumed me completely. The room beyond the door was an office, not abandoned, not dusty, clean, organized, illuminated by a single desk lamp that cast a warm circle of light across a wooden desk, a leather chair, a computer monitor displaying a screensaver of slowly rotating geometric shapes. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with binders labeled by year, 1987, 1992, 2003, 2019, and interspersed with framed photographs I couldn't quite bring myself to examine closely. Something about the faces in those photos felt wrong. The proportions, the angles, the way their eyes seemed to track me as I moved. On the desk sat a manila folder with my name typed on the tab. Not my name, my employee ID number. But somehow I knew it was meant for me. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents I recognized. My resume, my application, my background check, my signed offer letter. But there were other pages too. Performance reviews dated months into the future. Salary adjustments I hadn't requested. A memo regarding my Transition to permanent assignment, signed by someone whose title was listed only as Floor Supervisor, Level 8. At the bottom of the folder lay a photograph. It showed me sitting at this very desk, in this very chair, wearing clothes I didn't own, smiling at the camera with an expression I didn't recognize. The date stamp in the corner read 6 months from now. The desk lamp flickered once, twice, and I ran. The elevator was waiting for me, doors open, display showing nothing. I threw myself inside and jabbed at buttons until the car began to move. And when the doors opened on the 8th floor, my floor, the real 8th floor, the one with numbered offices and fluorescent lights that didn't flicker, I nearly collapsed with relief. My colleague with the wire-rimmed glasses found me slumped against the wall outside the restroom 20 minutes later. He asked if I was feeling all right. I told him I'd skipped lunch. He nodded sympathetically and returned to his cubicle without another word. That night, I tried again to tell my wife. I showed her the emails, but they'd vanished from my inbox, even from the server, even from the search results when I typed in the sender's numerical address. I described the office, the folder, the photograph, and watched her face shift from concern to something closer to fear. She suggested I call my doctor. She suggested I take some time off. She slept on her side of the bed that night, turned away from me, and I lay awake until dawn wondering which of us was right to be afraid. The emails come every day now. Your attendance has improved. We're pleased. The onboarding process is nearly complete. We look forward to your full integration. I've stopped showing them to anyone. I've stopped talking about the floor entirely. My wife watches me with careful eyes, and I catch her sometimes on her phone, typing messages I'm not meant to see, and I wonder if she's researching psychiatric facilities or divorce attorneys. My colleagues give me space. The thin man with the glasses no longer makes small talk. The security guard in the lobby watches me with something that might be recognition or might be pity. Last week I found a key card in my jacket pocket. It wasn't there when I left for work. The card is blank, no name, no photo, no magnetic stripe, but when I hold it, I feel a strange warmth spreading through my palm, and I know, with absolute certainty, that it will open every door on the floor that doesn't exist. I haven't used it yet, but I've started taking the elevator again. Every morning, I press the button for 8 and wait for the car to shudder, to stop, to open its doors onto that flickering corridor. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. The pattern eludes me, follows rules I can't decipher, and I've begun to suspect that the floor isn't choosing when to appear. It's choosing when to let me in. Yesterday, I stayed late to finish a report. The building emptied around me, cubicles going dark one by one, until I was alone on the 8th floor with only the hum of my computer for company. When I finally packed up my things and walked to the elevator, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A door at the end of the hallway, unmarked, slightly ajar. It hadn't been there that morning. I'm certain of it. I walked past that spot a dozen times a day, and the wall had always been solid, unbroken, unremarkable. I stood there for a long time, my bag over my shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching the thin line of darkness visible through the gap. The air that drifted through smelled of dust and old paper, and something faintly sweet. Somewhere beyond that door, I heard the soft click of a keyboard, the creak of a leather chair, the low murmur of a voice that might have been speaking my name. I took the stairs. But tonight, lying in bed while my wife breathes steadily beside me, I find myself thinking about the photograph in the folder, the version of me that smiled at the camera, the clothes I didn't own, the date stamp reading 6 months from now. I find myself thinking about the key card in my jacket pocket, warm against my palm, and I find myself wondering, not whether the floor is real, but whether it matters anymore, whether reality is a fixed point or a negotiation, whether there's a version of me already sitting at that desk, already integrated, already home. The emails stopped this morning. In their place, I received a calendar invitation. No subject, no location, no attendees listed except my employee ID number and a single line of text. Orientation begins Monday. Please arrive early. The meeting is scheduled for floor 8, not the 8th floor, Floor 8. I haven't decided yet whether I'll go, but I've noticed something strange over the past few days. A feeling I can't quite name. A sense that the spaces around me, my cubicle, my apartment, the streets I walk between them, have grown somehow thinner, less substantial. As if they're scenery in a play I've been watching my whole life, and only now am I beginning to see the edges of the stage. As if the floor that doesn't exist is more real than everything I've ever known. Tonight I'll dream of corridors again. I know this with the same certainty I know my own name, or the name I've always believed was mine. I'll walk those flickering hallways and count those numbered doors and stand before that office where a desk lamp waits, where a leather chair waits, where a folder with my future inside it waits. And maybe this time, I won't wake up. Or maybe I already have. Story 4. The first time I noticed the figure, I told myself it was a coat rack, a lampshade, some piece of furniture catching the amber glow from the streetlights below. The human mind craves explanation, and mine offered one readily. A silhouette standing motionless in the window of Building C, directly across the courtyard from my own apartment, was simply an object I had never paid attention to before. That was 3 months ago. The condominium complex sprawls across 4 interconnected buildings arranged around a central courtyard, each tower rising 12 stories into the perpetually gray sky of this city. My wife and I moved here 18 months ago, drawn by the affordable rent and the promise of a quiet neighborhood. The apartment itself is modest. 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen with a window that overlooks the courtyard, and a living room where I spend most of my evenings reading or staring at the television without really watching it. The walls are thin enough that I can hear my neighbors' muffled conversations, their footsteps, the occasional argument that rises and falls like distant thunder. But Building C, the one facing ours, has always been different. Quieter. The windows there seem darker somehow, as if they absorb light rather than reflect it. I work from home now, a circumstance that has both blessed and cursed me with endless hours of solitude. My wife leaves at 7 in the morning and returns at 8 in the evening, sometimes later, and during those 13 hours, I am alone with my thoughts and my computer, and the view from the living room window. It was during one of those long afternoons that I began to truly observe the silhouette. It stood in the window of what I estimated to be the 7th floor, 4th unit from the left, always in the same position, always facing my direction. The shape is unmistakably human. I can see the rounded crown of a head, the slope of shoulders, the suggestion of arms hanging at its sides. But there is something wrong with the proportions, something I cannot quite articulate. The head seems too large, perhaps, or positioned at an angle that would be uncomfortable for any normal person to maintain, and it never moves. Not once, in all the hours I have spent watching, have I seen it shift its weight, turn its head, or step away from the glass. At first I mentioned it to my wife casually, pointing toward Building C during dinner one evening. She glanced in the direction I indicated, shrugged, and told me she didn't see anything unusual. "Just an empty window," she said. "Just darkness." I looked again, and there it was, the silhouette, clear as day against the faint interior light. I described it to her, tracing its outline in the air with my finger, but she only frowned and suggested I might be tired, overworked. She recommended I take a break from staring at screens all day. I tried to follow her advice. I rearranged my desk so that it faced away from the window. I closed the curtains during the day, something I had never done before. But the knowledge of the figure's presence gnawed at me. A splinter lodged beneath my skin that I could not stop touching. And at night, when my wife slept soundly beside me, I would lie awake and listen to the silence of the apartment, wondering if the silhouette was still there, still watching, still waiting. The light began appearing 2 weeks after my initial observation. It happens at exactly 3:14 in the morning. I have checked my phone enough times to be certain of the precision. A pale yellow glow flickers to life in that 7th floor window, illuminating the silhouette from behind and throwing its shadow forward, toward me. The light remains on for exactly 47 minutes before extinguishing itself as suddenly as it appeared. I know this because I have stopped sleeping. I lie in bed with my eyes open, watching the clock on my nightstand, waiting for the moment when the darkness across the courtyard will be broken by that sickly luminescence. My wife has not noticed the light. She sleeps deeply, undisturbed by my restlessness, and when I have tried to wake her, shaking her shoulder gently, whispering her name, she only mumbles something incoherent and turns away. By the time her eyes flutter open, the light has always gone dark again, and I am left with no proof of what I have witnessed. Last week, I decided to report the situation to the building management. The porteria, as we call it here, is staffed 24 hours a day by a rotating cast of security guards and doormen who monitor the comings and goings of residents. I approached the night guard, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, and explained my concerns. I told him about the silhouette, the light, the strange hours. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and then consulted his computer. His response has haunted me ever since. That apartment, he informed me, has been vacant for 5 years. The previous occupant, he did not offer details and I did not ask, had moved out abruptly, and the unit had remained empty ever since. No one had rented it, no one had purchased it, and no one had been authorized to enter. He showed me the records on his screen, a spreadsheet of occupied and unoccupied units, and there it was, 7D, Building C, status vacant, last occupancy date more than half a decade in the past. I asked him about the light. He told me there was no light. The electricity to that unit had been disconnected years ago, he explained, his tone patient but vaguely condescending, as if he were speaking to a confused child. There could be no light because there was no power. I must be mistaken, he suggested. Perhaps I was looking at the wrong window, the wrong building, the wrong floor. I thanked him and returned to my apartment, my hands trembling slightly as I unlocked the door. That night, I sat in the living room with the curtains drawn back, watching the window across the courtyard. At 3:14, the light appeared. Since then, things have changed. I have begun to notice details that I cannot explain. Small wrongnesses that accumulate like sediment at the bottom of a river. The temperature in our apartment has dropped, though my wife insists she feels nothing unusual. There is a smell, faint but persistent, that seems to seep through the walls at night, something organic and slightly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. And the sounds. Oh, the sounds. Footsteps in the hallway outside our door at hours when no one should be awake. A soft tapping on the walls, irregular and unpredictable, as if someone were testing the structural integrity of the building. The distant hum of an elevator that stops, according to the display panel, on no floor at all. My wife has grown concerned about me. She tells me I look pale, that I have lost weight, that I mutter in my sleep, though she cannot make out the words. She has suggested delicately that I might benefit from speaking to someone, a professional, someone who could help me process whatever it is that has been troubling me. I have not told her the full extent of my observations. I have not told her that I have started keeping a journal, documenting each appearance of the light, each instance of the silhouette, each anomaly that I encounter. I have not told her that I have begun to suspect that the figure in the window is not merely watching the building, but watching me specifically, tracking my movements, anticipating my routines. 3 nights ago, I made a decision that I now regret. I waited until my wife was asleep, then slipped out of our apartment and made my way to Building C. The courtyard was empty at that hour, the only illumination coming from the scattered windows of insomniac residents and the pale blue glow of the security booth near the main entrance. I approached the building's lobby door and found it unlocked, a security oversight perhaps, or something else entirely. The elevator stood waiting, its doors open, as if it had been expecting me. I pressed the button for the 7th floor. The ascent was silent, the mechanical hum of the elevator barely audible over the pounding of my own heartbeat. When the doors opened, I found myself in a corridor that looked identical to the one in my own building. The same beige walls, the same industrial carpet, the same flickering fluorescent lights, yet something felt fundamentally different. The air was thicker here, heavy with that same sweet rot smell I had noticed in my apartment. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that feels less like an absence of sound and more like a presence, a weight pressing against my eardrums. I walked slowly down the hallway, counting doors until I reached 7D. The door was ajar, not open exactly, but not fully closed either. A gap of perhaps 2 inches between the door and the frame, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I stood there for what felt like hours, my hand raised to push it open, my body frozen by a terror I could not name. And then, from somewhere inside the apartment, I heard it, a sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic, impossibly loud in the stillness of the corridor. I fled. I do not remember the journey back to my own apartment, do not remember the elevator ride or the walk across the courtyard or the moment when I slipped back into bed beside my sleeping wife. What I remember is the certainty, the absolute, bone-deep certainty, that something had followed me, that something had watched me approach, had waited for me to come closer, and had chosen, for reasons I cannot fathom, to let me go. Since that night, the silhouette has changed. It is closer now. Not to my building, the distance between us remains the same, but closer to the glass of its own window, as if it has taken a step forward, as if it is pressing itself against the barrier that separates us. And its posture has shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Where before it stood with arms at its sides, now one arm appears to be raised, extended toward my apartment, toward me. The light still appears at 3:14, but it is brighter now, harsh and unforgiving, casting shadows that seem to move independently of any source. And there are other lights, too, in windows that the security guard assures me are also vacant, on floors that the building records show have never been occupied. They flicker on and off in patterns that might be random, or might be something else entirely, something that resembles communication. My wife has stopped asking me about my sleeplessness. She has stopped asking me about anything at all, really, retreating into a silence that mirrors my own. We move through our apartment like ghosts, occupying the same space but never quite touching, never quite connecting. I wonder sometimes if she has begun to see what I see, if she lies awake at night watching the window across the courtyard, if she has noticed the figure and the lights and the wrongness that permeates every corner of our existence. But I'm afraid to ask, afraid of what her answer might be. Last night, something new happened. I was sitting in the living room watching the window as I always do, when the silhouette moved. Not a small movement, not a subtle shift, a clear, deliberate turn of its head, angling toward me with what I can only describe as intention. And then for the first time I saw its face. Or rather, I saw the absence where a face should be. A smooth, featureless expanse of pale skin, unmarked by eyes or nose or mouth, reflecting the light from my own apartment back at me like a mirror. I screamed. I must have screamed, because my wife came running from the bedroom, her eyes wide with alarm, her hands gripping my shoulders as she demanded to know what was wrong. I pointed toward the window, toward Building C, toward the figure that was still standing there, still faceless, still watching. She looked. She looked for a long time, and then she turned to me, her expression soft with pity, and told me there was nothing there. I'm writing this now in the early hours of the morning, with the light from 7D burning across the courtyard like a beacon. The silhouette stands at the window, its arms still raised, its blank face turned toward me. I can feel it watching, can feel its attention like a physical weight upon my skin, and I can hear it now, a sound that might be breathing or might be whispered words, or might be nothing at all, seeping through the walls and the glass and the very fabric of reality. My wife sleeps in the other room. She has begun locking the bedroom door at night, she says, because she is worried about sleepwalking, about night terrors, about the strange behaviors I have exhibited in recent weeks. But I know the truth. She is not locking herself in, she is locking me out. I do not know what the figure wants. I do not know if it is real, if it was ever real, if I am the only one who can see it, or if I am the only one who has chosen to look. What I know is this: the gap between our buildings has begun to feel smaller. The courtyard below seems to shrink each night, the distance between my window and that empty apartment collapsing inch by inch, as if reality itself is folding inward. Soon, I think, there will be no gap at all. And when that happens, when the silhouette finally crosses the threshold, when the light finally reaches my window, when the breathing finally becomes words I can understand, I wonder if I will still be here to witness it, or if I ever was. Story 5. The chat was moving slow that night, the way it always does on Wednesdays. Maybe 12, 15 viewers tops. The usual crowd of insomniacs and night shift workers killing time while I fumbled through another run of a survival horror game I'd already beaten twice. The rain had been falling for hours, a constant static against my window that blended with the white noise of my PC fans. I remember thinking how perfect the atmosphere was. The storm outside, the darkness of my office lit only by the blue glow of my monitors, the creaking of my old house settling into itself. It felt cinematic. It felt right. I wish I had ended the stream earlier. The first message appeared around 11:47 p.m. I didn't notice it immediately. I was too focused on managing my inventory, muttering half-thoughts into my microphone about ammunition conservation. But when I glanced at the chat window during a loading screen, there it was, a username I'd never seen before. A string of numbers and lowercase letters that seemed almost random, almost deliberate in their meaninglessness. The woman across the street just closed her curtains. I read it twice, 3 times. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain how to respond. It wasn't unusual to get strange comments. Every streamer deals with trolls, with people testing boundaries, with those who mistake anonymity for permission. But something about the specificity unsettled me. I lived on a quiet street, the kind where neighbors knew each other's schedules without ever speaking. And there was, in fact, a woman who lived in the house directly across from mine. A retired school teacher who kept odd hours. I glanced toward my window. The blinds were drawn, as always during streams. I couldn't see anything. I typed a response, something dismissive, something meant to sound unbothered. I asked if they were enjoying the stream. The reply came instantly. "Your porch light is flickering. You should fix that." My stomach tightened. I'd been meaning to replace that bulb for weeks. It had developed an intermittent flicker that I'd learned to ignore, the way you learn to ignore all the small failures of an aging house. But how would anyone know that? How would anyone watching a stream of my face and a video game know anything about the state of my porch light? I told myself it was a coincidence. I told myself they were guessing, that porch lights flicker all the time, that I was being paranoid. The game loaded, and I forced my attention back to the screen, navigating my character through a darkened hospital corridor. The irony wasn't lost on me, playing a game about fear while something cold and uncertain began to coil in my chest. The messages continued. The gray car parked 3 houses down. Engine's been running for 10 minutes. Someone walked by your house. Hoodie, didn't look up. Your neighbor's dog is barking now. You probably can't hear it over your headphones. I pulled one side of my headset away from my ear. The faint, muffled sound of barking reached me through the walls. My throat went dry. The chat remained otherwise empty. My regular viewers had gone quiet, or perhaps they'd left entirely. I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't looking at the viewer count. I was looking at those messages, watching them appear one after another with the mechanical precision of a metronome. Each one a small violation, a tiny proof that someone was watching more than my stream. I asked who they were. I asked how they knew these things. I asked if this was some kind of joke, if someone I knew was messing with me, if there was a point to any of this. The response was the same each time. Another observation, another detail about the world immediately outside my walls. The motion sensor light on your garage just turned on. Cat, probably. Hard to tell from here. From here. Those 2 words lodged themselves in my mind like splinters. From here implied location. From here implied proximity. From here implied that whoever was typing these messages could see my house, could see the motion sensor light that I'd installed last summer after a string of break-ins 3 blocks over, could see the way it threw harsh white light across my driveway before timing out and plunging everything back into darkness. I stood up from my chair. The movement was abrupt enough that my microphone caught it, and I saw my own image on the preview screen, a pale figure rising in a dark room, face underlit by monitor glow, like something from a horror movie. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Almost. I walked to the window and parted the blinds with 2 fingers. The street was empty, rain-slicked pavement reflecting the amber of streetlights. Parked cars sitting silent and dark. No gray car with a running engine, no figure in a hoodie, nothing but the ordinary quiet of a neighborhood after midnight. When I returned to my desk, there was a new message waiting. You just looked outside. You looked scared. I sat down heavily, my legs suddenly uncertain. The game was still running, my character standing motionless in that hospital corridor, while something growled in the digital darkness ahead. I'd forgotten about it entirely. I'd forgotten about the stream, about the viewers who might still be watching, about anything except the cold certainty that I was being observed. I asked again who they were. I demanded an answer. I threatened to end the stream, to call the police, to do something, anything, to reassert control over a situation that was rapidly sliding away from me. You won't call anyone. You don't believe this is real yet. They were right. I didn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, because believing it meant accepting that someone was outside my house, watching me through my windows, watching my stream, typing messages in real time about the intersection of those 2 perspectives. It was too precise, too invasive, too much like something from one of the games I played, and that familiarity made it feel fictional, made it feel like a story happening to someone else. The rain intensified. I could hear it drumming against the roof now, a sound that had been background noise and was now oppressively loud, filling the silence between messages. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale. The man who just walked past your house stopped at the end of your driveway. He's looking at your window. I didn't go to check. I couldn't. My body refused to move, locked in the chair, fingers gripping the edge of my desk. I stared at the message and felt something cold spread through my chest. Not fear exactly, but its close cousin. That primal awareness of danger that predates language, predates thought. He's still there. He hasn't moved. He knows you can see these messages. He's smiling. I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking badly enough that I nearly dropped it, and when I managed to open the camera app, I couldn't make myself stand, couldn't make myself walk to the window, couldn't bring myself to see what might or might not be standing at the end of my driveway in the rain. I sat there, phone in hand, paralyzed by the weight of possibilities. The messages stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the rain, just the glow of my monitors, just my own ragged breathing too loud in my ears. I thought maybe it was over. I thought maybe the troll had gotten bored, had moved on to torment someone else, had achieved whatever satisfaction they'd been seeking. Then a new message appeared. He's not at the end of the driveway anymore. I waited. The cursor blinked. The seconds stretched. Your back door is unlocked. You never remember to lock it. My back door. The one that led from my kitchen to the small patio. The one I used to let in fresh air on summer nights. The one I walked through 100 times without thinking about whether I'd secured it behind me. The one that was, now that I thought about it, on the opposite side of the house from where I was sitting. The one I couldn't see from here. I should have moved. I should have run to check. Should have grabbed something heavy. Should have called someone. Should have done anything other than sit frozen in my chair while my heart hammered against my ribs. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. The terror had become a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest, pinning me in place. You're not alone in the house. The words glowed on my screen, impossible and absolute. I stared at them until my eyes burned. until the letters started to blur and swim. The game was still running. I could hear the ambient audio, footsteps and distant screams, and all the manufactured terror I'd found so entertaining an hour ago. Now it sounded obscene. Now it sounded like mockery. I forced myself to turn around. My office door was open. I always kept it open during streams. The ventilation helped, and besides, I lived alone. There was no reason to close it, but now that open doorway looked like a wound in the wall, a rectangle of darkness leading into the unlit hallway beyond. I stared into that darkness and saw nothing. I strained my ears and heard nothing. Nothing but the faintest sound of breathing that wasn't my own. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself the rain was playing tricks, that my own fear was manifesting in phantom sounds, that the human mind creates monsters where none exist. I told myself all of this while my eyes stayed locked on that doorway, watching for movement, watching for the slightest shift in the quality of that darkness. A new message appeared, but I didn't look at the screen. I couldn't look away from the doorway. I heard the notification sound, the soft chime that meant someone had typed in the chat. Then another. Then another. The chimes kept coming, a steady rhythm, and in my peripheral vision I could see text scrolling rapidly, message after message appearing faster than anyone could type. Still I couldn't look. Still I watched the darkness. And then, slowly, like dawn breaking over a terrible landscape, I began to see a shape. A suggestion of form in the shadows. Shoulders, the curve of a head. Something tall and still, standing just beyond the threshold of my office, close enough that it must have been there all along, waiting for me to notice. The chiming stopped. In the silence that followed, I finally looked at my screen. The chat was filled with a single message, repeated dozens of times, scrolling endlessly upward. Behind you. Behind you. Behind you. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what had moved while I was looking at my monitor. I didn't want to know how close it had gotten, whether it was breathing now against the back of my neck, whether the pressure I felt, that weight of presence, that certainty of proximity, was real or imagined. The stream was still running. I could see myself in the preview window, a small figure hunched in a chair, face pale and frozen, eyes too wide. The room behind me was dark, pixelated by the low-resolution camera, rendered in shadows and suggestions. I studied that image, looking for shapes, looking for proof. I couldn't tell if there was something there or not. The darkness behind me could have been empty. It could have been full. I ended the stream. The monitors went dark, and I sat there in the sudden blackness, listening to the rain, listening to my own heartbeat, listening for anything that might tell me whether I was alone. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I couldn't say, the sun began to rise. Gray light seeped through my blinds, revealing my office exactly as it had always been. Empty. Ordinary. My back door, when I finally checked, was locked. There was no evidence that anyone had been inside, no muddy footprints, no doors left ajar, nothing to suggest that the night had been anything other than a bad dream brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. I almost believed it. I almost convinced myself. But when I opened my streaming software to check the chat logs, everything was gone. The entire conversation had been erased. Not just the messages from that account, but everything. The chat was empty, as if no one had spoken at all. And the account with the meaningless username? It doesn't exist. I've searched for it 100 times. I've gone through my blocked users, my followers, every database I can access. There's no record that it ever existed. Sometimes, at night, I think I can still feel it. That presence behind me. That weight of being watched. I've stopped streaming. I've moved my desk so my back is against the wall. I check my locks obsessively, sometimes 5 or 6 times before I can sleep. None of it helps. Because the worst part, the thing that keeps me awake, the thing that makes me question everything I thought I knew about reality, is this. When I watched the recording of my stream the next day, trying to find proof, trying to understand what had happened, I saw something I can't explain. In the last few seconds, just before I ended the broadcast. There's a moment when the light catches differently, a moment when the shadows behind me seem to coalesce, seem to solidify, seem to take on a shape that could almost be a figure standing close enough to touch me. Almost. I've watched those seconds 1,000 times. I still can't tell if it's real or if it's just my eyes, desperate and terrified, finding patterns in the dark. I don't know which answer frightens me more. Story 6. The cabin smelled wrong. Not unpleasant exactly, just wrong. Like the scent of someone else's home. That particular cocktail of laundry detergent and cooking residue and skin cells that belongs to a stranger. My colleague had warned me the place would feel unfamiliar at first, isolated as it was. 3 hours from the nearest town and surrounded by nothing but pine trees, so dense they swallowed the sky. He'd laughed when he handed me the keys, told me I'd love it once I settled in. A week of silence, he said. A week to clear my head. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the autumn light already failing by 4 o'clock. The cabin sat in a small clearing, its wooden walls weathered to a gray that matched the overcast sky. Smoke stains darkened the stones around the chimney. The windows watched me like cataract-clouded eyes as I pulled my bag from the trunk. The mud was soft from recent rain, and my boots sank into it as I walked to the front door. I noticed my footprints behind me, deep impressions filling slowly with brown water. I would come to know those prints intimately over the following days. I would learn to recognize their shape, their depth, the particular pattern of my soles. Inside, the cabin was simple. A main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a bedroom with a mattress that smelled faintly of cedar. The electricity worked, though the lights flickered when the wind picked up. My colleague had left provisions, canned soup, instant coffee, a bottle of whiskey that I promised myself I would ration. Cell service was non-existent, but he'd assured me the landline functioned for emergencies. That first night passed without incident. I read by the fire, listened to the wind move through the pines like breath through teeth, and slept deeply, for the first time, in months. The second night, I heard the footsteps. I was dozing in the armchair, a book splayed open on my chest, when the sound pulled me back to consciousness. Heavy, deliberate, the unmistakable crunch of boots on wet earth circling the cabin's perimeter. I sat up, heart suddenly loud in my ears, and listened. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The rhythm was steady, almost mechanical. Someone walking slowly around the house. I thought perhaps a hiker had gotten lost, or a local had come to check on the property. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. Nothing. The clearing was empty, washed in pale moonlight. The trees stood like sentinels at the edge of the darkness, but the footsteps continued, now on the opposite side of the cabin, and I ran to that window, pressed my face against the cold glass, and still saw nothing. When I opened the front door, the sound stopped. I stood there, flashlight beam cutting weak patterns in the mist, my breath visible in the frigid air. The silence was absolute, not even insects, not even wind. I swept the light across the mud in front of the porch. My footprints from earlier were there, dried and cracked at the edges, and beside them, a second set, larger than mine, deeper, leading around the side of the cabin and disappearing into the tree line. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe. Bears were known to roam these woods. The prints were strange, yes, too regular, too human-shaped. But the darkness plays tricks. The mind fills in patterns where none exist. I locked the door, checked the windows, and did not sleep until dawn painted the sky the color of a bruise. By the fourth night, the whispers had started. They came after midnight, when the fire had burned to embers and the cold began seeping through the cabin walls like something alive. At first, I mistook them for wind, for the creak of settling wood, for the 1,000 small sounds an old structure makes when the temperature drops. But then I heard my name, soft, intimate, as if spoken by someone standing just outside the window, lips nearly touching the glass. I lay in bed, covers pulled to my chin like a frightened child, and listened to my own name repeated over and over in a voice I almost recognized. It was not quite my mother's voice, not quite my wife's, my ex-wife's, I should say, Though even after 2 years, the correction feels like swallowing glass. It was something that had learned the shape of those voices, something that was using them incorrectly. I did not go to the window. I did not call out. I lay there until the whispers faded with the approaching dawn, and then I got up and checked the mud around the cabin. The footprints had multiplied. 3 distinct sets now, overlapping, circling. Some of them led to the windows and stopped there, as if their makers had stood for hours, watching. The mud directly beneath my bedroom window was churned into a thick paste, disturbed by what must have been dozens of steps in place. I called my colleague using the landline. The connection was poor, static crackling through his words, but I managed to explain what was happening. He laughed. That same easy laugh from when he'd handed me the keys. Just the forest, he said. Animals. The isolation getting to me. He reminded me that no one lived within miles, that the property was completely private, that I was alone out here. That was the part that stayed with me. That emphasis on alone. I began keeping a journal on the 5th day, not from any writerly impulse, but from a desperate need to document what I was experiencing, to create a record that would exist outside my own increasingly unreliable mind. I wrote down everything. The time the footsteps began, the direction of the whispers, the exact number of prints I found each morning. I photographed the mud with my phone, though of course I couldn't send the images to anyone. Looking at those photos now, I noticed something I didn't see at the time. In the background of one image, barely visible between 2 trees at the edge of the clearing, there is a shape. It could be a shadow. It could be a trick of the light, a compression artifact, pareidolia turning randomness into meaning. But it looks, if I squint, like a figure standing motionless, watching. I do not remember anyone being there when I took the photograph. The nights grew worse. The footsteps became bolder, sometimes approaching the porch, sometimes stopping just outside the front door. I could hear breathing, or what sounded like breathing, slow and wet, as if filtered through damaged lungs. The whispers multiplied, layering over each other in a chorus of my name spoken in voices that belonged to everyone I had ever known, and no one at all. I stopped sleeping. I moved the armchair to face the front door and sat there through the dark hours, fireplace poker across my knees, watching the shadows move on the other side of the windows. I told myself I was being rational, that I was simply taking precautions against intruders. I told myself that a reasonable person would do the same. But reasonable people do not spend their days measuring their own footprints obsessively, comparing them to the others, convincing themselves they can see the difference. Reasonable people do not start talking to the empty rooms, filling the silence with their own voice just to hear something human. On the 6th night, I saw the face. I had been watching the window for hours, that hypnotic state between waking and sleep where reality becomes soft at the edges. The fire had burned down to its last glow, and then, in my peripheral vision, I saw movement at the glass. I turned my head slowly, the way you do when you're afraid that quick motion will shatter something fragile. A face was pressed against the window, features smeared and distorted by the old glass, by the darkness, by my own exhaustion. But I could see enough. A mouth, open slightly. Eyes that caught the dying firelight and reflected it back wrong. Not the red of human retinas, but something yellower, like a cat's, like something that lived in the dark. We stared at each other. I could not move. I could not breathe. And then the face smiled, and the smile was too wide, the lips pulling back past where lips should stop, and I screamed. When I reached the window seconds later, it was gone, but the glass was fogged where the face had been, and in the fog, barely visible, was a handprint. Small, delicate, fingers longer than they should have been. I touched the glass from my side. It was ice cold. The handprint was on the outside. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back to the wall, facing every window simultaneously. An impossible task, I know, but I tried. I talked to myself constantly, narrating my own actions, grounding myself in the sound of my voice. I'm sitting in the corner. I'm holding the poker. The fire is out. The sun will rise soon. When dawn finally came, I went outside with a kind of desperate courage. I had to know. I had to see. The footprints around the cabin had changed. They no longer circled. They led inward, all of them, converging on the front door like spokes on a wheel. Dozens of prints in the mud, different sizes, different depths, all pointing toward the threshold where I now stood. And among them, mixed in with the evidence of what I had assumed were multiple visitors, I saw something that made my stomach turn to ice. My own prints, my boots, my tread pattern, my stride length, leading out from the cabin into the trees, joining the others, circling back. I looked at my boots. They were clean. I had not left the cabin since yesterday afternoon. The phone rang at noon. I nearly collapsed from the shock of it, that shrill electronic sound in the thick silence of the cabin. I answered with shaking hands, expecting my colleague, expecting news from the outside world. Static. Then breathing. Then my name, whispered once, in my own voice. The line went dead. I tried to call out. The phone made no sound. The cord, I discovered, had been chewed through. Not cut, chewed, with marks that could have come from human teeth. The landline had not worked in days. Perhaps it had never worked at all. Had I truly spoken to my colleague? Had I imagined the whole conversation, my mind providing the comfort it needed? I searched the cabin then, tore apart every drawer, every closet, every cabinet. I found nothing, no signs of intrusion, no evidence of anyone but myself. But I also found the journal I had been keeping. The handwriting was mine. I recognized it immediately. But the entries were wrong. According to my own words, I had been here for 3 weeks, not 6 days. According to my own words, I had been going outside every night, walking the perimeter, pressing my face to the windows to look in at myself sleeping. According to my own words, I was not alone in the cabin. I had never been alone. I am writing this now because I need someone to know. I need a record that exists outside my head, outside this cabin, outside whatever is happening here. The sun is setting. Through the window, I can see the shadows lengthening across the clearing, reaching toward the cabin like fingers. In an hour, maybe less, the footsteps will begin again. The whispers will start. Something will circle this place where I sit, calling my name in voices I almost recognize. I have checked my boots 3 times. They are by the door where I left them. They are caked with mud. I do not remember putting them on. The thing about isolation is that it strips away all the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about who we are. Out here, alone, with nothing but the trees and the darkness and the sounds that might be real, I am forced to confront a terrible possibility. That the line between observer and observed, between inside and outside, between self and other, is not as solid as I believed. Something is circling this cabin. Something calls my name each night. Something leaves footprints in the mud. The face I saw at the window smiled at me with recognition, and as I sit here watching the last light fade, I find myself wondering, not with fear anymore, but with a strange, hollow curiosity, whether I will remember tonight, whether I will wake tomorrow and find new entries in my journal, describing things I do not recall doing, whether the footprints outside will include another set of my own boots, walking paths I cannot remember walking. The first whisper has begun. It sounds like me. Story 7. The floorboard creaked differently than the others. I noticed it on my 3rd night in the apartment, somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the building had settled into that particular silence that old structures cultivate like a secret. I had been lying awake, listening to the radiator's irregular ticking, when I shifted my weight and the board beneath my feet produced a hollow sound. Not the usual groan of aged wood, but something deeper, suggesting empty space beneath. I told myself I would investigate in the morning. I didn't. The apartment had come to me through desperation more than choice. A studio on the 4th floor of a pre-war building in a neighborhood that had seen better decades, with water stains mapping unknown continents across the ceiling and windows that rattled in their frames like old bones. The rent was almost suspiciously low. but I had stopped asking questions about good fortune months ago. Around the same time, my savings account had dipped into double digits, and my former landlord had changed the locks while I was at work. My new home measured roughly 400 square feet. A kitchenette with a hot plate and a refrigerator that hummed an atonal melody. A bathroom so narrow I could touch both walls while standing at the sink. A main room that served as bedroom, living room, and office, furnished with whatever the previous tenant had left behind. A mattress on a metal frame, a wooden chair with one leg shorter than the others, a small table scarred with cigarette burns. The building manager, a woman with steel gray hair and an expression suggesting chronic disappointment, had mentioned that the last occupant had left suddenly. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The sounds began on my second week. At first, I attributed them to the building's age, to the symphony of settling that all old structures perform when darkness falls. Creaking from the walls, soft thuds from somewhere above, though the building manager had assured me the 5th floor had been vacant for years. A scratching sound that seemed to migrate from corner to corner, never staying in one place long enough to locate. I would lie in bed, staring at the water stains, and listen as the apartment spoke its incomprehensible language around me. Then I started hearing the whispers. They were never quite loud enough to understand, more the suggestion of words than words themselves, like a radio tuned just slightly off station. They seemed to emanate from the walls, from the floor, from the very air itself. I would wake at 3 in the morning, my heart racing, certain that someone had just spoken my name, only to be met with silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. I mentioned it to my coworker during our lunch break, trying to frame it as a joke about my haunted apartment. He suggested it might be pipes or perhaps neighbors on the other side of thin walls. I nodded and agreed, though I knew the apartments on either side of mine were empty. I had checked the mailboxes, all of them stuffed with uncollected circulars and letters addressed to names that didn't match the faded labels. The hollow floorboard called to me. I would find myself standing over it at odd hours, feeling its slight give beneath my weight, listening to that empty echo. One night I pressed my ear against it and could have sworn I heard something breathing on the other side. Slow, rhythmic, patient. I finally pried it up on a Thursday evening, using a kitchen knife as a makeshift lever. The wood came away with surprising ease, as if it had been removed and replaced many times before. Beneath it lay a cavity, roughly the size of a shoebox, lined with dust and darkness, and a notebook. It was a common composition book, the kind I had used in school, with a marbled black and white cover and yellowed pages. The binding had begun to separate, and a musty smell rose from it, the odor of age and neglect and something else, something organic that I couldn't identify. I lifted it carefully, as if handling an artifact, and carried it to the table. The first entry was dated March 15th of the previous year. I hear them again tonight, the whispers in the walls. I've tried to convince myself it's just the building, just the pipes, just the settling of old bones. But I know better now. Something is here with me. Something has always been here. I felt the hair rise on my arms. The handwriting was cramped and urgent, the words pressed deep into the page as if the writer had been trying to carve them into stone. I read on. The entries chronicled a descent. The man, for the handwriting suggested a man, though he never identified himself, had moved into the apartment 8 months before me. He too had noticed the sounds, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. He too had tried to rationalize, to explain, to dismiss, and he too had failed. May 3rd. I've started leaving the lights on at night. It doesn't help. If anything, it makes it worse. I can see shadows moving in my peripheral vision now, shapes that dissolve when I turn to face them. The corner by the window is the worst. Something stands there sometimes. I can feel it watching. I looked at the corner by the window. The lamp cast strange shadows there, pooling darkness that seemed almost deliberately arranged. I looked away. June 19th. I tried recording the whispers last night. When I played the audio back, I heard my own voice saying things I don't remember saying, phrases in languages I don't speak. My name, repeated over and over, and something else. Another voice, beneath mine, like an echo from the wrong direction. The entries grew more fragmented as the months progressed. Entire pages were filled with nothing but the same phrase repeated. It knows, I know it knows, I know it knows. Others contained detailed diagrams of the apartment, with certain areas circled and labeled with words like cold spot and threshold and don't look. Some pages had been torn out entirely, leaving only ragged stumps along the spine. Then I reached the entry dated 2 weeks before my move-in date. Someone is coming. I don't know how I know this, but I know. A man. He'll find this notebook. He'll read these words. I need to warn him, but I don't know how. The words come out wrong, twisted, like the whispers have gotten into my language somehow. Maybe I can write to him. Maybe if I write what will happen, he'll understand. My hands trembled as I turned the page. He'll hear the radiator first. That ticking sound, irregular, like a code he can't decipher. Then the creaking, moving through the walls as if something is circling him, learning his patterns. The whispers will start in his second week. He'll lie awake, listening, trying to convince himself it's nothing. The radiator ticked in the silence. I counted 5 beats, then 3, then 7. An irregular pattern, exactly as described. He'll tell his coworker about the sounds. The coworker will suggest pipes, neighbors. He'll nod and agree, though he'll know better. I had told my coworker. He had suggested pipes. I had nodded. He'll find this notebook on a Thursday evening. He'll use a kitchen knife to pry up the floorboard. He'll read these words at the table, beneath the light with the water stains on the ceiling above him, and he'll feel the cold start to creep up his spine, because he'll understand that I'm not predicting his future. I'm remembering it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I looked up at the ceiling, at the water stains, at the familiar pattern of forgotten continents. The light flickered once, twice, and held. I turned the page with fingers gone numb. Here's what will happen next. He'll put down the notebook. He'll tell himself this is a hoax, a prank, an elaborate fiction left behind by a disturbed mind. He'll go to bed, but he won't sleep. He'll lie there listening to the sounds, the whispers, the breathing from beneath the floor. And sometime around 3 in the morning, he'll start to wonder. If this notebook predicted his past so accurately, what does it say about his future? I put down the notebook. I told myself it was a hoax, a prank, an elaborate fiction. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the sounds, to the whispers, to something that might have been breathing from beneath the floor. At 2:47 a.m., I got up and retrieved the notebook. The remaining entries were sparse, scattered across the final pages like debris after a storm. Fragments of description, pieces of conversation, glimpses of a future that hadn't happened yet, or had already happened, depending on which direction time was flowing. He'll start talking to himself. Just small things at first, narrating his actions, asking questions no one answers. Then the responses will come. He won't notice at first that he's not alone in the conversation. I had been talking to myself. Just small things, hadn't I? The corner by the window will get worse. He'll start avoiding it, walking the long way around the room, keeping his back to it without consciously deciding to. But it doesn't matter. It sees him anyway. It always sees. I had been avoiding the corner. I hadn't noticed until now. He'll stop sleeping. He'll stop eating. He'll call in sick to work, then stop calling altogether. The outside world will fade, will recede, will become less real than the whispers. He'll spend his days reading these words, searching for a way out, not understanding that the words are the way in. I read on. I couldn't stop. The final entry was dated for tomorrow. He'll find the second notebook. He doesn't know about it yet, but he will. It's hidden in the wall behind the radiator, in a cavity just like the one beneath the floor. And in that notebook, he'll find his own handwriting. Pages and pages of his own words, descriptions of his own life, predictions that have already come true. He'll understand then. he'll finally understand. There is no previous tenant. There never was. The man who wrote this notebook, the man who heard the whispers, the man who felt the watching. The entry ended mid-sentence. The rest of the pages were blank. I sat at the table until morning came, gray light filtering through the rattling windows, turning the apartment into something flat and unreal. The radiator ticked its irregular code. The walls creaked as if breathing, and in the corner by the window, something watched me read its words. I should leave. I should pack my few possessions and walk out the door and never return. I know this with the same certainty I know my own name, the same certainty with which I know the sounds will come again tonight, and the night after, and all the nights to follow. But I can also feel it, that pull toward the radiator, toward the wall behind it, toward whatever is hidden there. The second notebook, my handwriting, my words. I tell myself I won't look. I tell myself I'll leave today, this morning, right now. But the floorboard creaks differently than the others, and the whispers have started early today, and I can almost hear them forming words now. My name, repeated, and something else beneath it, an instruction or an invitation or a warning I can't quite decipher. And I have to know. I have to know what I wrote. The radiator ticks, 5 beats, then 3, then 7. I stand. I walk toward it, toward the wall behind it, toward the cavity I somehow always knew was there. And in the corner by the window, something that might be my shadow, or might not be, turns its head to watch me go. Story 8. The night shift on Route 47 teaches you things about silence that daylight never could. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of something else. A thickness in the air that settles over the asphalt like fog, muffling everything except your own heartbeat and the occasional crackle of static from your radio. I've worked this stretch for 11 years now, the 17-mile corridor between the old textile mill and the county line, and I thought I understood its particular brand of loneliness. I was wrong. It started 3 months ago, during one of those moonless nights when the darkness feels solid enough to touch. I was parked at my usual spot near mile marker 23, sipping cold coffee from a thermos my wife had packed that morning, when I noticed headlights approaching from the south. They moved slowly, too slowly, weaving slightly as if the driver couldn't quite maintain their lane. I set down the thermos and reached for my flashlight, preparing for what I assumed would be another drunk driver, another routine stop, another report to file before dawn. But as the vehicle drew closer, something felt wrong. The headlights had a yellowish tint, the kind you don't see anymore, the kind they stopped putting in cars decades ago, and there was no engine sound. Even from a distance, even with my windows up, I should have heard something. Tires on gravel, the hum of a motor, anything. There was only that oppressive silence, growing heavier with each passing second. I stepped out of my cruiser and raised my flashlight, but the beam seemed to die before reaching the car, swallowed by darkness that shouldn't have been that deep. The vehicle, an old sedan, boxy and rust-colored, rolled past at perhaps 15 miles per hour. No license plate, no registration sticker, and in the passenger seat pressed against the window, a face. Pale, eyes fixed directly on me, mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-word. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stared as the car drifted by and continued north until its taillights, dim, reddish, flickering like dying embers, vanished into the night. I stood there for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted only 4 minutes had passed. The cold crept up from the asphalt, seeping through my boots, climbing my legs like something alive. I told myself it was nothing. A vintage car enthusiast, a trick of the light, exhaustion playing games with my perception. I ran the description through our database the next morning, more out of curiosity than concern. Rust-colored sedan, boxy frame, late 1970s model. The system returned 3 results, all connected to the same incident. A multi-vehicle collision on Route 47, mile marker 24, 32 years ago. The photographs in the file showed the sedan crushed against the guardrail, its passenger side caved in. The damage matched nothing I remembered seeing the night before. I didn't tell my wife. What would I say? That I saw a car that shouldn't exist, driven by no one, carrying passengers who looked at me like they recognized something I couldn't see in myself. She already worried about the long nights, the isolation, the way I sometimes came home with shadows under my eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. So I kept quiet, and I waited. The second encounter came 2 weeks later. Different vehicle, a pickup truck this time, faded blue, its bed empty except for what looked like moving blankets piled in the corner. Same silence, same yellowed headlights, same impossible slowness, as if the truck were pushing through water instead of air. 2 figures sat in the cab, their heads turned toward me as they passed. One of them, the driver I think, raised a hand, not waving, pointing, at me, at my cruiser, at something behind me that I was too afraid to turn and look at. I checked the database again. Blue pickup, late 1960s model, involved in a rollover accident on Route 47 4 decades ago. The location matched almost exactly where I'd been parked. After that, I started keeping a notebook. Dates, times, descriptions, license plates that didn't exist, faces that all shared the same pallor, the same stillness, the same unsettling awareness of my presence. Every vehicle I recorded traced back to accidents on this stretch of highway, some recent enough to have made the local news, others so old that the files had yellowed and the photographs had faded to near invisibility. My colleague at the station, a veteran officer with 20 years more experience than me, noticed the notebook one afternoon. He asked what I was working on, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I made up something about tracking patterns in speeding violations. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they don't believe you but aren't willing to push. Then he said something that's been echoing in my head ever since. Some stretches of road remember things differently than we do. I asked him what he meant. He just shrugged and walked away, but I caught him looking at me from across the room later, his expression unreadable. The sightings became more frequent. Once a week, then twice, then every other night. The cars varied. A station wagon with wood paneling, a motorcycle with an empty sidecar, a delivery van with a logo for a company that went bankrupt in 1987. But the passengers never changed. Always pale, always watching, always that same slow, deliberate movement past my position, as if they were following a route programmed into something deeper than memory. I started dreaming about them. Not nightmares exactly, but something worse. Calm, quiet dreams where I sat in one of those vehicles, watching myself from behind glass that I couldn't break. In the dreams, I tried to speak, to warn myself, to say something, anything. But my mouth wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't come. And the version of me standing outside just stared back with the same expression I'd seen on all those passengers. Recognition, resignation, something like pity. My wife asked why I'd been talking in my sleep. I told her I didn't remember. Another lie added to the pile growing between us like something organic, something feeding on the silence I brought home each morning. The worst part isn't the sightings themselves. It's the way they've changed how I see everything else. Now, when a normal car passes during my shift, headlights white and modern, engine humming, driver alive and distracted by their phone or their radio, I feel a jolt of surprise, relief, followed immediately by suspicion. How do I know they're real? How do I know any of this is real? Last week I noticed something new, a detail so small I almost missed it, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The rearview mirror of my cruiser had condensation on it, breath marks, like someone had been sitting in my back seat, exhaling against the glass while I watched the road. I live alone in that car for 8 hours every night. The heater barely works. There shouldn't be any breath but mine. I wiped the mirror clean. The marks came back the next night, and the night after that. Always in the same pattern, always positioned as if someone were leaning forward, watching the road over my shoulder, breathing slowly, patiently, waiting. The database has become my obsession. I've cross-referenced every sighting, every vehicle, every accident in the county, records going back 60 years. There are patterns I can't explain, dates that repeat, Locations that cluster around certain mile markers like iron filings drawn to a magnet. And then there's the list, the one I found buried in an old incident report from before I was born, hand-typed on paper so brittle it nearly crumbled when I touched it. A list of officers who worked this stretch of Route 47. Their names, their badge numbers, and next to each one, a date. Some of the dates were retirements, some were transfers, but others, the ones written in different ink, added later by a different hand, were simply marked discontinued. I found my own badge number on that list, no date next to it, not yet. Tonight I'm parked at mile marker 23 again. The coffee is cold, the radio is silent except for that familiar static, rising and falling like breathing, and in the distance I can see headlights approaching. Yellowish, dim, moving too slowly. But this time, there's something different. This time, the headlights aren't coming from the south. They're coming from behind me, growing brighter in my rearview mirror, illuminating the condensation marks that spell out something I can almost read. Something that might be a word or might be a name or might be nothing at all. I don't turn around. I know what I'll see if I do. I know because I've been dreaming it for weeks now, because I've felt the cold presence in my back seat growing stronger each night, because somewhere deep in the part of my mind that still functions rationally, I've understood something that I've been refusing to acknowledge. The figures in those cars aren't looking at me because they recognize what I am. They're looking at me because they recognize what I'm becoming. The headlights in my mirror are almost blinding now. The static on my radio has shifted into something rhythmic, almost like words, almost like a voice calling a badge number that might be mine. And somewhere ahead, at mile marker 24, I can see more headlights gathering, waiting. A procession of vehicles that shouldn't exist, driven by passengers who watch and point and remember. I reach for my radio to call dispatch. My hand stops midway. The handset is already off the cradle, already pressed against my ear, already broadcasting a conversation I don't remember starting. A voice on the other end. My colleague, the veteran, his tone flat and unsurprised, asks if I've seen anything unusual tonight. I try to answer. I try to describe the headlights, the faces, the breath on my mirror. But what comes out of my mouth is something different, something I don't recognize. A phrase that sounds like coordinates, like mile markers, like a report I've filed before, many times, without remembering. The veteran officer thanks me for checking in. He tells me to stay safe out there. Then he pauses, and in that pause, I hear something beneath the static. Other voices, dozens of them, reciting the same coordinates in the same flat tone, a chorus of officers calling in from stretches of highway that might exist and might not, that might be real and might be dreams, that might be the past and might be what's coming next. The headlights in my mirror are gone now. So are the ones ahead. The road is empty, dark, silent in that heavy way I've come to know too well. I look down at my hands on the steering wheel. They're pale, paler than they should be. And when I check the rearview mirror one last time, the condensation marks have shifted into a new pattern. A date, written in the same hand that filled in all those entries on the list. A date that might be tomorrow, or might have been 30 years ago, or might be right now, this moment, this breath, this endless night on Route 47 where the cars keep passing and the passengers keep watching, and the static keeps calling badge numbers that belong to officers who are still here, who have always been here, who will always be here. Driving the same stretch of road, filing the same reports, wondering if they're the ones watching or the ones being watched. My wife will wake up tomorrow and find my side of the bed cold. She'll check her phone for messages I never sent. She'll wait for me to come home, and when I don't, she'll call the station, and they'll tell her what they always tell them. That I was a good officer, that I served with distinction, that sometimes on Route 47 the night shift just goes on forever. And somewhere on this road, in a cruiser that looks exactly like mine, I'll be parked at mile marker 23, watching headlights approach from the south, reaching for a thermos of cold coffee, wondering when the silence got so loud, waiting for the passengers to look at me the way I've always looked at them, waiting to find out which side of the glass I've been on all along. Story 9. First time I heard it, I convinced myself it was nothing. Old buildings settle, pipes groan, wood expands and contracts with the weather. These are the lies we tell ourselves when we move into a place with cheap rent and questionable history, the kind of building where the superintendent avoids eye contact and the hallways smell of something sharp and medicinal, like cleaning products trying too hard to mask something else. But settling wood doesn't drag furniture across hardwood floors at 3 in the morning. I had been living in apartment 4B for exactly 11 days when the sounds began. My wife and I had separated 2 months prior. Her decision, though I suppose I gave her plenty of reasons, and I needed somewhere affordable, somewhere anonymous, somewhere I could disappear into myself and figure out how everything had gone so wrong. The building on Marsh Street seemed perfect. 6 floors, brick facade stained dark by decades of city grime, windows like hollow eyes watching the traffic below. My unit was on the 4th floor, and the superintendent, a thin man with nicotine-stained fingers and a voice like gravel in a blender, assured me the building was quiet. Mostly older tenants, people who kept to themselves. He failed to mention the 5th floor. The first night I slept poorly, which I attributed to the unfamiliar mattress and the orange glow of the streetlight bleeding through my bedroom blinds. The second night, I heard what I thought was a television playing above me. Muffled voices, indistinct but animated, rising and falling in the cadence of an argument. I pressed my pillow over my ears and eventually drifted off. By the third night, I recognized the pattern. Always starting around 2 or 2:30 in the morning, always the same sequence. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing directly above my bedroom. Then the scraping, something large being pushed across the floor, stopping, starting again, as if someone was rearranging furniture in the dark. And underneath it all, those voices, too muffled to understand but too insistent to ignore. By the 7th night, I had stopped sleeping entirely. The exhaustion settled into my bones like a second skeleton. I would lie in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, watching the shadows thrown by passing headlights crawl across the plaster like searching fingers. The sounds came without fail. Sometimes I thought I could almost make out words. A man's voice, low and insistent, and another voice responding, higher, pleading. But whenever I strained to listen, the sound seemed to shift, to slip away from comprehension like water through cupped hands. On the 8th day, I decided to go upstairs and confront whoever was living there. The stairwell between the 4th and 5th floors was different. I noticed it immediately. The way the temperature dropped as I climbed, the way the air felt thicker, harder to breathe, as if the building itself was reluctant to let me ascend. The fluorescent light on the 5th floor landing flickered arrhythmically, casting the hallway in stuttering pulses of sickly yellow. The carpet up here was older than on my floor, a faded burgundy pattern that might have been elegant once, but now just looked like old blood dried into fabric. I found apartment 5B directly above mine. The door was not merely closed, it was sealed. Thick wooden boards had been nailed across the frame in haphazard diagonals, the wood gray with age, the nails rusted to the color of dried autumn leaves. A notice was stapled to one of the boards, the paper yellowed and curling at the edges. I leaned closer to read it. Condemned. Unfit for human habitation. By order of the City Housing Authority. Date, November 14th, 1987, 1987, nearly 4 decades ago. I stood there for what felt like a long time, my hand raised as if to knock, frozen in the absurdity of the gesture. You don't knock on sealed doors. You don't knock on apartments that have been condemned for 37 years. And yet, as I stared at those weathered boards, I could hear it, faintly, like sound traveling through water, footsteps on the other side, pacing, back and forth, back and forth. I told myself it was the building settling. I told myself sounds could travel strangely through old pipes and ductwork. I told myself a lot of things as I walked back down to my apartment, my legs feeling loose and unreliable beneath me. That night, the sounds were louder. The scraping began earlier, around midnight, and continued for hours. I lay in bed with my eyes open, counting the footsteps, trying to map the movement above me. Whoever, whatever, was up there seemed to be walking in circles, tight spirals that centered directly over my bed. The voices came and went in waves, and once, just once, I heard something that made my breath catch in my throat. My name, whispered, stretched, drawn out like taffy, but unmistakably my name, seeping through the ceiling like water through rotted wood. I told myself I had imagined it. The superintendent was no help. I found him in the basement the next morning, tending to the ancient boiler with the resigned attention of a man who had given up on expecting things to work properly. When I mentioned the 5th floor, his hand stopped moving. He didn't look at me. He simply stood there, very still, and asked what I meant by the 5th floor. I explained about the sealed apartment, about the sounds, about the notice from 1987. He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he said that there was no apartment 5B. The 5th floor had been closed off before he started working here, he told me. Structural issues. No one had lived up there in decades. When I insisted I had been there, had seen the door, had read the notice, he finally turned to look at me, and something in his expression made me take a step back. He told me to get some sleep. He said I looked like I needed it. I started keeping a journal. I thought if I documented everything, wrote it all down in careful, precise detail, I could prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I noted the times the sounds began and ended. I described the quality of the footsteps, sometimes heavy and purposeful, sometimes shuffling and irregular, as if whoever was walking had trouble with their legs. I recorded the temperature drops that preceded the activity, the way my bedroom would become so cold I could see my breath fogging in the air, even though it was the middle of June. I also started noticing things in my apartment, small things at first. Objects that I was certain I had left in one place appearing somewhere else. My keys, which I always hung on the hook by the door, turning up in the bathroom medicine cabinet. A coffee mug I had washed and placed in the drainer found sitting on my nightstand, filled with cloudy water. The photograph of my wife, my estranged wife, that I kept face down in my desk drawer, standing upright on my dresser, her frozen smile catching the morning light. I told myself I was simply tired, that exhaustion was playing tricks on my memory. But then I found the footprints. It was a Thursday, I think, though by then the days had begun to blur together. I had spilled flour the night before while attempting to make something to eat, and in my stupor, I had forgotten to clean it up. When I woke the next morning, if you could call it waking, since I never truly slept anymore, there were footprints in the flour. Bare feet, the impressions clear and distinct, leading from my bedroom door to the side of my bed and back again. The prints were wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, the toes splayed at angles that seemed anatomically impossible. I measured them. I don't know why. I got down on my hands and knees with a tape measure from my toolbox and recorded the dimensions in my journal with hands that would not stop shaking. 14 inches long, 3 inches wide at the ball of the foot. The arch was barely there, almost flat, as if whatever had made these prints was not designed for walking so much as dragging itself forward. That night, I didn't lie down. I sat in the armchair in the corner of my bedroom, a flashlight in my lap, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The sounds began at their usual time, the pacing, the scraping, the muffled voices that rose and fell like tides. I gripped the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached, and I watched the ceiling, waiting for something, anything, to show itself. And then I saw the ceiling move. Not much, just a subtle bulge, a swelling in the plaster directly above my bed, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. I watched, frozen, as the bulge grew, the plaster cracking in hairline fractures that spread like veins across the surface. Dust sifted down, catching the streetlight, floating like ash. The voices above grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with sick certainty that they were not arguing. They were calling. I fled the apartment in my pajamas. I spent the rest of the night in a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, drinking burnt coffee and watching the sky lighten through the grease-smeared windows. The waitress asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. I didn't believe me either. I went back the next afternoon in full daylight, when the sounds never came. The ceiling in my bedroom was smooth, undamaged, no cracks, no bulge, no dust on the floor beneath it. I touched the plaster with trembling fingers, half expecting it to give way, to plunge my hand into some impossible space beyond. But it was solid, cold, somehow colder than it should have been, but solid. I called my wife that evening. She didn't answer, and I was almost relieved. What would I have told her? That I was hearing things? That my apartment was haunted? Or that I was finally losing the mind she had always accused me of neglecting? I left no message. What message could possibly be left? The journal is almost full now, every page covered in my increasingly erratic handwriting, documenting sounds and temperatures and displaced objects and the growing certainty that something is watching me. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself listening not for the sounds above, but for the silence. The thick, expectant silence that falls just before the activity begins, as if the building is holding its breath. Last night, I woke to find my bedroom door open. I know I locked it. I always lock it now. But it was standing wide open, and there was a smell in the air, old and organic, like soil after rain, like something dug up from deep underground. And in the hallway, just beyond the reach of the streetlight's glow, I saw a shape, tall, too tall, standing motionless in the dark, watching me with eyes I couldn't see but could feel, pressing against me like cold hands against glass. I did not move. I did not breathe. And after a time that stretched into eternity, the shape retreated, folding backward into the shadows, and I heard footsteps ascending the stairs, going up, always up. This morning I went back to the 5th floor. The hallway was exactly as I remembered. The flickering light, the blood-colored carpet, the sealed door of apartment 5B. But something had changed. The notice was gone. The boards were gone. The door stood slightly ajar, darkness pooling in the gap like spilled ink. I should leave. I know this. I should pack my things and walk out of this building and never look back. But there is something in me now, something that whispers in a voice too much like my own, telling me that I need to know, that I need to open that door and see what has been watching me, calling me, waiting for me all this time. The door is open. I think it has always been open. I think I have been living in apartment 5B all along. Story 10. The call came in at 11:47 p.m., and I remember the exact time because I had been staring at the clock on my phone, counting the minutes until my shift ended. The building management system flagged room 1408 on the 14th floor. Temperature rising, AC unit unresponsive, occupancy sensors showing activity. I checked the work order twice. The system insisted someone was in there, working late, sweating through what should have been a routine Thursday night. I gathered my tools and headed for the elevator, the fluorescent lights humming their tired song above me. The lobby was empty, as it always was at this hour, but the marble floors still gleamed as if expecting important visitors. My footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing off surfaces that seemed to swallow every other sound. The elevator ride was slow. 14 floors of mechanical groaning and the faint smell of old cigarette smoke that no amount of cleaning had ever erased. The previous maintenance supervisor had told me the building was constructed in 1987, that it had history. He never elaborated on what kind of history. He quit 3 months after I started, moved to another state without giving notice. Sometimes I wondered what he knew that I didn't. The 14th floor was dark when the doors opened. Not completely. The emergency exit signs cast their red glow across the carpet, but darker than it should have been. The motion sensor lights that lined the hallway remained dormant as I stepped out, which struck me as odd. They were supposed to activate with any movement. I waved my hand. Nothing. I took 3 steps forward, then 5. The darkness held. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, illuminating rows of closed office doors, each one identical, each one silent. Room 1408 was at the end of the hall, near the corner where two corridors met. As I walked, I became aware of a sound, faint at first, almost imperceptible, like the memory of a sound rather than the thing itself. Typing. The soft, rhythmic clatter of fingers on keyboards, multiple keyboards, from what I could tell. A chorus of productivity emanating from somewhere ahead. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear. The silence pressed against my eardrums with an almost physical weight. Then, slowly, the typing resumed. It was coming from 1408. The door was closed when I reached it. A small placard beside the frame read, "Conference Room B," though I could have sworn it said something different the last time I was on this floor. I couldn't remember what. The memory slipped away like water through fingers. I knocked. The typing stopped again. I announced myself, explained I was there to fix the air conditioning. No response. Just that pregnant silence, thick and watchful. I tried the handle. It turned easily, and the door swung inward on hinges that didn't make a sound. The smell hit me first. Dust. Not the light, everyday dust that accumulates on forgotten surfaces, but something older, denser. The kind of dust that speaks of years, maybe decades, of absolute stillness. I swept my flashlight across the room and felt my stomach drop. The conference room was empty, not just unoccupied, abandoned. A long table dominated the center, its surface coated in a thick gray layer that my flashlight beam disturbed into lazy spirals. Chairs surrounded it, 8 of them, pushed in at perfect intervals. Cobwebs stretched between them like delicate bridges. The windows along the far wall were grimy, nearly opaque, filtering the city lights into a sickly yellow haze. No one had been in this room for a very long time, but the system said, a chair moved. Not dramatically, not violently. It simply rolled backward about 6 inches, its wheels leaving tracks in the dust. I watched it happen. I watched the dust part around invisible legs, watched the seat cushion compress slightly under a weight I couldn't see. I should have left. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, to walk back to the elevator, to file a report about a malfunctioning sensor and let someone else deal with it in the morning. But my feet wouldn't move. My eyes were fixed on that chair, on the impossible indentation in its cushion. The typing started again. This time I could locate it. The far end of the table, where a thin layer of dust had been disturbed in a rectangular pattern. The ghost of a laptop that wasn't there. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it at the spot. The dust was moving. Tiny particles rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the sound of keys being struck. I felt something brush against my arm. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. The doorway stood empty, the hallway beyond swallowed by darkness. But I could feel it now. A presence, a pressure, like being watched by dozens of eyes from every direction at once. The air had grown cold, despite the supposedly broken AC unit. My breath fogged in front of me. The system had said the room was too hot. The system had lied. I forced myself to move toward the AC panel on the wall, telling myself I was just doing my job, that there had to be an explanation. Faulty sensors, electromagnetic interference, carbon monoxide leak affecting my perception, though that didn't explain the dust, the cobwebs, the years of neglect in a building I walked through every single night. As I crossed the room, more chairs began to move. They rolled out from the table one by one, their wheels squeaking softly against the floor, each one stopping at a precise angle as if pulled out by invisible hands. 8 chairs, 8 positions, a meeting taking place in a room that time had forgotten. I reached the AC panel and pried it open with shaking hands. Inside, the components looked normal, dusty but functional. I ran my diagnostics. Everything checked out. The unit was working perfectly, had probably been working perfectly for years. There was no reason for this call, but the system showed. Behind me, the typing grew louder. It was joined by other sounds now. The creak of chairs as weight shifted in them, the soft rustle of papers being shuffled, a throat being cleared, someone coughing, the sounds of an office in full operation. conducted by a staff I couldn't see. I turned slowly, not wanting to look but unable to stop myself. The dust on the table was disturbed in multiple places now, patterns forming that suggested documents being passed, pens being set down, cups being raised and lowered. The cobwebs had torn in places, broken by movements I couldn't track, and in the grime on the windows, words were appearing. They wrote themselves in the condensation that had no business being there, letters traced by fingers that didn't exist, messages forming in reverse so I could read them from inside. We never left. I stumbled backward, knocking into a chair that rolled away with a squeal. My flashlight flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, I could almost see them. Shapes at the edge of perception, silhouettes that sat in the chairs and leaned over the table, figures that turned toward me with what might have been faces. The light steadied. They were gone. But I knew they weren't really gone. They were still there, had always been there, would always be there. The room held them the way amber holds insects, preserved, suspended, eternal. My radio crackled. The security guard at the front desk checking in, asking if everything was okay. His voice sounded distant, warped, as if traveling through water. I couldn't remember how to respond. I couldn't remember my own name. The writing on the window changed. Stay. I ran. The hallway stretched impossibly long as I sprinted toward the elevator. The motion sensor lights finally activated, but wrong. They turned on behind me and off ahead of me, keeping me always at the edge of darkness, always running into shadow. The elevator doors opened before I reached them, and I threw myself inside, jamming my finger against the lobby button until my nail bent backward. The doors closed. The elevator began to descend. But through the narrowing gap, I saw the door to room 1408. It was open, and standing in the doorway, just barely visible in the red glow of the exit sign, was a figure, watching me, waving. Its hand moved the way you might wave goodbye to a colleague leaving for the night. Casual, friendly, normal. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator and didn't breathe until the doors opened on the lobby. I walked past the security guard without speaking, past the gleaming marble floors and the humming fluorescent lights, past my locker and my time card, and everything that had defined my nights for the past 2 years. I walked out the front door and into the cold air of a city that suddenly felt like a foreign country. I didn't go back. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. My supervisor left voicemails that I deleted without listening to. Eventually, they stopped calling. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I checked the building's blueprints a week later, after the nightmares started. The 14th floor exists, of course. The hallway exists. The conference room exists. But according to every document I could find, room 1408 was sealed in 1994. A renovation project that was never completed. Some kind of incident. The records are vague, the details redacted or missing. The room was simply walled off, erased from the floor plan, removed from the building's official registry. But the room is still there. I've been inside it. I've felt the cold that shouldn't exist, and heard the keyboards that don't exist, and seen the messages written by hands that can't exist. The building management system still shows occupancy in room 1408. I know because I checked. Every night between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., the sensors register movement, body heat, activity, a full complement of workers putting in overtime. I don't know what happened in that room. I don't know who they were or what they're doing or why they never left. Maybe they can't leave. Maybe they don't know they should. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake at 3 a.m., sweating through my sheets, maybe it's not a haunting at all. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Maybe my co-workers are right when they say I've been acting strange lately, that I seem tired and distant and not quite myself. Maybe there's something in my brain misfiring, some tumor or chemical imbalance turning ordinary rooms into nightmares. My wife asked me yesterday why I keep checking our apartment for dust. I didn't have an answer, because here's the thing. When I woke up this morning, there were tracks in the carpet, footprints leading from my bedroom door to my bed and back again, footprints in dust that shouldn't be there, that I swept up just last night. And on my bathroom mirror in the fog from my shower, 4 words written in a handwriting I almost recognized. We never leave. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I ever did. Story 11. The camera was old, a relic from another decade, its plastic casing yellowed like aged newspaper. I found it buried beneath boxes of forgotten things in the basement, tangled in a nest of cables that smelled faintly of copper and dust. My wife had been asking me to set up some kind of monitoring system ever since we moved into this house 3 months ago. The neighborhood was quiet, almost unnervingly so, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place demanded vigilance. So when I pulled the camera from its grave of cardboard and cobwebs, I thought it was providence. It took me 2 hours to get it working. The power adapter was corroded, the lens clouded with a film I couldn't quite scrub away. But eventually, the red light blinked on, and I connected it to my phone through an app so outdated it hadn't been updated since 2016. The feed was grainy, washed in that sickly green tint of old night vision technology, but it worked. I mounted it in the corner of the living room, angled toward the front door and the staircase that led down to the basement. That first night, I checked the feed obsessively. Every 30 minutes, I'd unlock my phone and stare at the static image of my own living room, rendered in shades of phosphorescent green. Nothing moved. The house was still. My wife slept beside me, her breathing slow and even, while I watched pixels shift and settle on a screen too bright in the darkness of our bedroom. By the third night, I had stopped checking so frequently. The novelty had worn thin, replaced by the quiet certainty that I was being paranoid. The camera showed nothing but furniture, shadows, the occasional moth drawn to some invisible light source beyond the frame. Then I saw it. It was 3:47 in the morning. I remember because I couldn't sleep, and the timestamp burned itself into my memory with a clarity that still makes my stomach clench. I opened the app out of habit, expecting the same static tableau. But there, in the far corner of the frame, near the basement door, stood a figure. It was motionless, completely, impossibly still. The night vision rendered it in shades of gray and white, its outline blurred at the edges as though it existed slightly out of focus. I couldn't make out features, just the suggestion of a human shape, tall and thin, facing the camera. Facing me. My first thought was intruder. I threw off the covers, my heart hammering against my ribs, and grabbed the aluminum baseball bat I kept beside the nightstand. My wife stirred but didn't wake. I moved through the hallway in darkness, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, my breath coming in shallow gasps that seemed too loud in the silence. The living room was empty. I stood there for a long time, the bat raised, scanning every corner. The basement door was closed. The front door was locked. I checked the windows, checked the closets, checked behind the couch where shadows pooled thick and dark. Nothing. No one. When I finally returned to bed and opened the app again, the feed showed only the empty room. The figure was gone. I told myself it was a glitch. Old technology, corrupted data, a trick of the light. My wife asked me the next morning why I looked so tired, and I told her I hadn't slept well. I didn't mention the camera. I didn't mention what I'd seen. But the following night, it happened again. Same time. Same position. The figure stood by the basement door, its posture unchanged, its stillness absolute. This time, I watched it for nearly 20 minutes without moving, my phone growing warm in my grip. It didn't shift, didn't breathe, didn't do anything that would suggest it was alive. I went downstairs again. Again, the room was empty. But this time, I noticed something else. The dust that had accumulated near the basement door. I hadn't swept in weeks, and a fine layer of gray powder coated the floorboards, was disturbed. There were footprints, clear, defined impressions of bare feet, larger than my own, leading from the basement door to the exact spot where the figure had stood in the video. They stopped there, in the middle of the room, as though whoever had made them had simply ceased to exist. I measured them against my own feet. They were at least 2 sizes larger, the toes longer, the arch higher. I photographed them with my phone, my hands trembling so badly that the first 3 shots came out blurred. When I showed my wife the pictures the next morning, She frowned and said they looked like mine. I told her they weren't. She said I must have been sleepwalking. I have never sleepwalked in my life. The paranoia set in slowly, like water seeping through cracks in stone. I began checking the camera feed constantly, during meals, during work, in the middle of conversations. My wife noticed. She asked if everything was all right, and I said yes. Everything was fine, I was just tired. But I could see the concern in her eyes, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. I installed a second camera, then a third. I positioned them throughout the house, covering every angle, every blind spot. The basement received two of its own, one at the top of the stairs, one at the bottom, pointed at the darkness where the old camera had been buried. I told my wife it was for security. She didn't argue, but the silence that followed my explanation was heavy with unspoken questions. The figure began appearing in all of them. Not simultaneously. That would have been too simple, too easily explained. No, it appeared in one feed at a time, always in a different location, always facing the camera. Sometimes it stood by the front door, sometimes in the kitchen, near the window that looked out onto the backyard. Once, I found it in the basement, standing in the exact spot where I had discovered the old camera, its shape half obscured by shadows that seemed to cling to it like fabric. Each time I checked in person, the room was empty. Each time, I found footprints that didn't belong to me. I stopped sleeping. The exhaustion became a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, blurring the edges of my vision. My wife started sleeping in the guest room because I kept the lights on all night, kept pacing the halls, kept checking and rechecking the feeds on my phone. She told me I needed to see someone, a doctor, a therapist, anyone. I told her I was fine. The footprints started appearing in places I hadn't been. I found them in the basement one morning, a trail leading from the far corner to the bottom of the stairs. Bare feet, too large to be mine, pressed into dust I was certain I hadn't disturbed. I found them in the attic, in a part of the house I hadn't entered since we moved in. I found them outside my bedroom door, stopping just at the threshold, as though something had stood there watching me sleep. I reviewed the footage. Hour after hour of static rooms and shifting shadows. The figure appeared for exactly 47 seconds each time, always at 3:47 a.m., always in a different location. I began to notice details I had missed before. The way its head tilted slightly to the left, the way its arms hung at its sides too long, the fingers extending past where they should have ended, the way the pixels seemed to distort around its edges, as though the camera couldn't quite capture what it was seeing. I tried to show my wife. I queued up the footage, pointed at the screen, traced the outline of the figure with my finger. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable, and then she said she didn't see anything. Just the empty room, just the shadows. I played it again. The figure was still there, clear as anything, standing by the basement door. She shook her head. That night I set up a motion-activated alarm on every camera. If anything moved, my phone would alert me. I lay in bed, alone now. My wife had started staying with her sister, claiming she needed space. And I waited. At 3:47 a.m., every alarm went off at once. I grabbed my phone. Every feed showed the figure. The living room, the kitchen, the basement, the hallway, the bedroom. I looked up from the screen. The corner of my bedroom was empty. But on the feed, the figure stood there, 3 feet from my bed, its head tilted toward me, its arms hanging at its sides. I could see myself on the screen sitting up in bed, phone in hand, staring at the corner where it should have been. I looked at the corner. Nothing. I looked at the screen. It was still there. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. The figure on the screen didn't move. Neither did I. We existed in parallel, separated by some membrane I couldn't see or touch, watching each other through lenses and pixels and the thin barrier of a phone screen. Then, slowly, the figure raised one hand and waved. I dropped the phone. The screen cracked against the hardwood floor, the feed fragmenting into jagged lines of static. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding, my breath ragged, staring at the corner of my room. In the morning, I found footprints beside my bed. They led from the corner to the edge of the mattress, stopping inches from where I had slept. The dust was disturbed in the pattern of fingers, as though something had reached out and rested its hand on the sheets. I don't check the cameras anymore. I covered them with tape, then cloth, then finally ripped them from the walls entirely. The old camera from the basement, I buried in the backyard, 3 feet deep, beneath the oak tree that never grows leaves. My wife hasn't come back yet. She calls sometimes, asks how I'm doing, if I've talked to anyone. I tell her I'm fine. I tell her the house is quiet. I tell her I've stopped seeing things that aren't there. But at night, when the house settles into silence and the darkness pools in corners, I feel it. That sensation of being watched. That prickle at the back of my neck. That weight in the air. That wrongness that I can't explain but can't ignore. I don't look at the corners anymore. I don't open my eyes when I hear the soft creak of floorboards or the gentle sigh of air displaced by movement. The footprints keep appearing. In the dust by the basement door. In the powder I leave on the hallway floor as a test. Beside my bed each morning. Closer now, the toes nearly touching the mattress. Sometimes I wonder if the cameras showed me something real. Something that exists just beyond the edge of perception. Visible only through the mediation of lenses and screens. Sometimes I wonder if the cameras showed me something I created, some projection of a mind frayed by sleeplessness and isolation. And sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleeping, I wonder if there's any difference at all. Last night I woke at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of breathing that wasn't my own. I lay perfectly still, my eyes closed, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The breathing was slow, measured, patient, the rhythm of something that had all the time in the world. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't move. But just before I fell back into fitful sleep, I felt it, the lightest pressure on the sheets beside me, as though something had sat down on the edge of the bed, and in the morning, the footprints were on the mattress itself, pressed into the fabric, still warm to the touch. I don't know what's watching me. I don't know if it's real, but I know it's getting closer. Story 12. The lobby clock reads 2:47 a.m. when the first notification chimes. The sound cuts through the dead silence like a razor through silk. A soft, electronic ping that shouldn't startle me after 3 years of night shifts, yet tonight it sends a shiver crawling up my spine. I look at the monitor, and my reflection stares back from the dark screen corners. Hollow eyes, stubbled jaw, the worn face of a man who has spent too many nights alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the wheeze of ancient ventilation. Room 307. Check-in registered. I blink at the screen. There's no reservation for tonight. There hasn't been one all week. The Marmont Hotel sits on the edge of a dying highway, the kind of place travelers used to stop at before the interstate bypass strangled our little town into irrelevance. Now we average maybe 4 guests a month, and I know each one by the headlights that sweep across the parking lot, by the shuffle of tired feet through the automatic doors. No headlights came tonight. No footsteps. The doors haven't opened since I started my shift at 11. I reach for the phone to call my manager, then stop. He made it abundantly clear during our last conversation that he doesn't appreciate being woken for computer glitches. The system is old, he reminded me, held together by duct tape and prayers. These things happen. But the check-in log shows a timestamp, 2:47:03 a.m. A room key was dispensed from the automated kiosk, and according to the system, someone or something is now occupying room 307. I pull up the security feed, cycling through cameras with practiced efficiency. The parking lot, empty, save for my rusted sedan hunched beneath the single working streetlight. The main entrance, undisturbed, the automatic doors sealed tight. The elevator, still and silent, its brass doors reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Every hallway, every stairwell, every corner of this crumbling building, nothing moves. The cursor hovers over the third-floor corridor camera. I click. The hallway stretches out in grainy black and white, a tunnel of repeating doors and ugly carpet that seems to pulse slightly in the low resolution. Room 307 is at the far end, near the fire exit. The door is closed. The "Do Not Disturb" sign hangs from the handle. I didn't put that sign there. No one has been in that room for weeks. The stairs creak beneath my weight as I climb, each groan of the old wood obscenely loud in the suffocating quiet. I tell myself I'm being ridiculous, a software malfunction, nothing more. The building is settling, as old buildings do. The sign was probably left by the last guest and I simply failed to notice during my rounds. But my heartbeat tells a different story, hammering against my ribs with each step I take toward the third floor. The air grows thicker as I ascend, warmer, carrying a faint scent I can't quite identify. Something organic, something alive, like the breath of a sleeping animal. The third floor hallway stretches before me, identical to the one on the monitor, yet somehow wrong in ways I struggle to articulate. The carpet seems to swallow sound. The wallpaper, that hideous floral pattern that was probably fashionable in 1987, appears to shift in my peripheral vision, the flowers rearranging themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. I stop in front of room 307. The "Do Not Disturb" sign sways gently, as if disturbed by a breath of air, though the hallway is still as a crypt. I press my ear to the door. Nothing. No television murmur, no running water, no soft breathing of a sleeping guest. Just silence so complete it seems to have weight, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I knock. Once, twice, 3 times. No response. Using my master key, I unlock the door and push it open. The bed is unmade. The sheets are twisted into a shape that suggests a body, wrinkled and warm-looking, a depression in the pillow where a head might have rested moments ago. I cross the room and press my palm to the mattress. Heat radiates upward, the unmistakable warmth of recent occupation. In the bathroom, the mirror is fogged with condensation, the shower floor glistening with water that hasn't yet found the drain. Someone was here. Someone was just here. But the room is empty. I return to the front desk and review the footage again, frame by frame, watching myself enter and exit the third floor hallway. No other movement. No figures in doorways. No shadows that don't belong to me. The camera shows exactly what I saw with my own eyes. An empty corridor, an empty room. Except, I paused the footage at 2:51 a.m., 3 minutes after I left my desk. The hallway is clear, the door to 307 closed. But there, in the corner of the frame, nearly obscured by a water stain on the camera lens, I see something that makes my blood turn to ice water. A shape, barely visible, almost like a trick of light and shadow, but unmistakably human in outline. It stands at the far end of the corridor, near the fire exit, watching the camera, watching me climb the stairs in real time. I scrub forward. The shape doesn't move, doesn't change. It simply stops existing between one frame and the next, as if it was never there at all. I rewind. There it is again. Forward. Gone. Rewind. There. My hands are shaking now. I can hear my own breathing, ragged and quick, echoing off the marble floor of the empty lobby. The clock reads 3:22 a.m. Outside, the darkness presses against the windows like something trying to get in. Another chime. Another notification. Room 412. Check-in registered. I don't go upstairs this time. Instead, I sit frozen at my desk, watching the security monitors with the intensity of a man waiting for his own execution. The 4th floor camera shows nothing unusual. The hallway is empty. The door to 412 remains closed, but I noticed something I hadn't before. The timestamp in the corner of the feed, it's wrong. The numbers jump and stutter, sometimes racing forward, sometimes crawling backward, as if time itself is uncertain how to proceed within these walls. My phone buzzes. A text from my wife, who should be asleep at this hour. 3 simple words. Come home soon. I try to reply, but my fingers won't cooperate. The letters swim before my eyes, rearranging themselves into patterns that don't form words. I put the phone down. The lobby feels different now, smaller somehow. The shadows in the corners seem deeper, more substantial, as if they've been feeding on the darkness for hours and have finally grown fat enough to be noticed. The potted plant by the elevator, a half-dead fern I've walked past 1,000 times, appears to lean toward me, its fronds reaching in a direction that has nothing to do with the light. 3:48 a.m. Another chime. Room 215. Check-in registered. I watch the second-floor camera. Nothing. No movement, no shadows, no barely visible shapes. Just the empty hallway and the closed door of 215. But wait. The door is opening. Slowly, silently, it swings inward, revealing the darkness of the room beyond. On the screen, the movement is smooth, deliberate, almost invitation-like, as if someone inside is holding the handle, pulling it open for a guest who isn't there. Or for me. I find myself standing, though I don't remember deciding to rise. My legs carry me toward the stairs with a purpose that doesn't feel entirely my own, as if I'm a passenger in my own body, watching through eyes I can no longer control. The second-floor hallway smells of soap and something else, something underneath the soap, something old and patient and waiting. Room 215 stands with its door wide open, exactly as it appeared on the monitor. The darkness inside is absolute, a perfect rectangle of black that seems to absorb the hallway light rather than yield to it. I stand on the threshold, unable to move forward or retreat. My pulse thunders in my temples. My skin prickles with the certainty that I'm being observed, not just from within the room but from everywhere, from every shadowed corner, from behind every closed door on this floor, from the very walls themselves. A sound reaches me from the darkness, soft, rhythmic, unmistakable. Breathing, not my own. The hours blur together after that. I find myself back at the front desk with no clear memory of how I got there, only the lingering sensation of cold fingers trailing across the back of my neck. The monitors show empty hallways. The system continues to register check-ins. Room 108, room 503, room 222, but I no longer investigate. I sit motionless in my chair, hands gripping the armrests, eyes fixed on the screens as if looking away might allow something to slip through. The lobby clock reads 5:15 a.m. Dawn should be approaching, but the windows remain dark. The night stretches on with obscene persistence, as if someone has reached up and stopped the rotation of the earth, trapping me in this endless nocturnal purgatory. I become aware of small wrongnesses accumulating around me. The coffee in my mug is cold, though I made it fresh an hour ago. The photographs on the wall behind the desk, generic landscape prints that have hung there since before I was hired, now show different scenes than I remember. A forest where there should be mountains, a desert where there should be sea, and the lobby is no longer empty. I don't see them directly. They exist at the edges of my vision, flickering into half-existence whenever I'm not looking directly at a particular spot. Silhouettes in chairs that should be vacant. Shapes at the elevator, waiting for doors that never open. A figure at the window, pressing what might be a face against the glass from the inside. When I turn to look, they're gone. But I can feel them, their attention, their hunger, their profound and patient interest in the man behind the front desk who has been alone for so very, very long. The phone rings. The sound is wrong, too shrill, too insistent, more like a scream than a ring. I stare at it for 3 eternal seconds before answering. Static crackles through the receiver. Beneath it, buried like a voice underwater, I hear what might be words, might be my name, might be something that was once human trying to remember how speech worked. I hang up. The morning shift arrives at 7 a.m. My colleague, a heavy-set woman with tired eyes and a thermos of black coffee, finds me exactly where I've been sitting for the past 4 hours. She asks if I'm all right. I tell her yes. She doesn't believe me. I can see it in the way her gaze lingers on my face, on my hands that won't stop trembling, on the rings of sweat darkening my shirt collar. I pull up the check-in logs to show her, to prove that something happened during the night, that I'm not simply losing my grip on sanity. The system shows no registrations. Every room is vacant, just as it should be. The timestamps are clean, unremarkable. The security footage reveals nothing but empty hallways and a night receptionist making his usual rounds. No shapes in the shadows. No doors opening on their own. No evidence that anything at all occurred between 2:47 a.m. and dawn. She pats my shoulder and suggests I get some sleep. I nod. I gather my things. I walk to my car in the morning light, and the world feels thin around me, as if I could push my fingers through the fabric of reality and find something else underneath. Before I drive away, I glance up at the third-floor windows. Room 307. The curtain moves, just slightly, just enough. And I know, with a certainty that settles into my bones like winter cold, that I will be back tonight. That I have always been here, in some sense, in some layer of time that runs parallel to the one I thought I inhabited. That the hotel has been waiting for me since before I was born, since before the building was erected, since the first night fell over the first empty place and something hungry learned to fill it. I turn my key in the ignition. The clock on my dashboard reads 2:47 a.m. Outside, the sun continues to shine. Story 13. And the first call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while I sat in my office cubicle reviewing quarterly reports that meant nothing to anyone. My phone buzzed against the laminate desk, and when I glanced at the screen, I saw my own number staring back at me. A glitch, I thought. Some spoofing scam. I almost didn't answer, but I did. The voice on the other end was mine. Not similar to mine. Mine. The same slight rasp from years of coffee and poor sleep. The same hesitation before consonants. It was breathing hard, as if it had been running, and when it spoke, the words came out in a desperate whisper. Don't come home tonight. Please. Whatever you do, don't come home. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. My colleague in the adjacent cubicle asked if everything was okay, and I heard myself say yes. Everything was fine. Just a wrong number. But my hand trembled as I set the phone down, and the fluorescent lights above me seemed to flicker in a rhythm I couldn't quite identify. I told myself it was a prank. Someone with voice-altering software. Some elaborate joke orchestrated by a friend with too much time. But I don't have friends like that anymore. I don't have many friends at all. My wife and I moved to this city 3 years ago, and the connections we made have slowly withered like plants no one remembers to water. We exist in our routines now. Work, dinner, television, sleep, and the days blur together in a way that should feel peaceful, but instead feels like drowning in slow motion. The second call came 40 minutes later. Same number. My number. This time the voice was more urgent. I could hear something in the background, a sound like wind through a narrow passage, or perhaps breathing that wasn't my own. I know you didn't listen. I know you're going to go home anyway, but you need to understand something. A pause, wet and heavy. It's already there. It's been there for weeks, watching, learning your patterns. And tonight it's going to stop watching. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat like a fishbone. The other me, the voice that was mine but couldn't be, laughed then, a broken sound that held no humor. You're going to ask if this is real. You're going to ask yourself that question 100 times before sunset. And that's the problem, isn't it? You never trust yourself. You never have. The call ended. I left work early. I don't remember deciding to leave. Don't remember gathering my things or saying goodbye to anyone. I simply found myself in my car in the parking garage, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. The garage was silent except for the distant hum of ventilation, and the shadows between the concrete pillars seemed deeper than they should have been at 4 p.m. I didn't go home. Not right away. Instead, I drove. I took the highway that loops around the city, watching the skyline shrink and grow in my rearview mirror, and I tried to piece together what was happening. Rational explanations presented themselves like items on a menu. Stress-induced hallucination, elaborate hoax, some form of technological exploit I didn't understand. But none of them explained the voice. None of them explained how perfectly it captured my cadence, my breath, the particular way I swallow before saying something I don't want to say. The third call came while I was stopped at a red light near the industrial district. The sun had begun its descent, painting the warehouses in shades of rust and amber, and the light from my phone screen seemed impossibly bright in the gathering dusk. "You're driving. Good. That's good." My voice, the other voice, sounded exhausted now, each word dragging like something heavy being pulled across gravel. "But you need to go farther. Not just away from the house, away from the city. There's a motel off exit 47, the one with the broken sign. Stay there tonight. Don't call your wife. Don't call anyone." I found my voice this time, though it came out cracked and unfamiliar. I asked who this was. I asked what was waiting at my house. I asked why I should believe any of this. The response chilled me in a way I still can't articulate. "Because I'm you. I'm you from..." A burst of static swallowed the words. "And I've already made the mistake you're about to make." I went home. I walked through that door because I convinced myself I was being irrational, that there was nothing to fear in my own house with my own wife and my own life. And now I'm more static, longer this time, and beneath it, something that might have been sobbing. Now I'm trying to fix it. Now I'm trying to warn you because that's the only thing I can still do. The light turned green. A car behind me honked, the sound sharp and angry in the quiet street. I drove forward without knowing where I was going. I should explain something about my wife. We've been married for 7 years, and for most of those years, I've been happy. Genuinely happy, in the way that feels almost impossible to maintain. But lately, and I mean the last few months, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, there's been something different about her. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could describe to a therapist without sounding paranoid. Just small things. Wrong things. The way she sometimes pauses before responding to questions, as if translating from a language I don't know. The way I've woken up at night to find her side of the bed empty, and when I go looking for her, she's standing at the living room window, motionless, staring out at the street with an expression I can't read. The way she started asking about my routines, when I leave for work, when I come home, which route I take, with an interest that feels less like affection and more like inventory. I never mentioned these things to anyone. They seemed too small, too easily explained by stress or imagination or the natural drift that happens in long relationships. But sitting in my car as the sun bled out along the horizon, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I couldn't stop wondering if the voice on the phone knew about them too. The fourth call was different. It came at 6:23 p.m., just as I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station I'd never seen before. I was running low on fuel and lower on courage, and I'd already decided that I would go home after all, that I would walk through my own front door and prove to myself that there was nothing to fear. But when I answered, the voice was barely recognizable. Still mine, still carrying the unmistakable signature of my own throat and tongue, but stretched thin, as if it were being transmitted across a vast and terrible distance. "You're going to go home. I can feel it." I remember feeling it. A wet cough, followed by something that might have been a whimper. "Listen to me. When you get there, everything will seem normal. She'll be making dinner. She'll ask about your day. She'll smile at you, and for a moment, for one perfect moment, you'll think I was wrong. You'll think this was all some fever dream, some break from reality that you can laugh about later." I waited. The gas station's neon sign buzzed and flickered overhead, casting red light across my dashboard in uneven pulses. But watch her shadow. I asked what that meant. I asked again, louder, my voice cracking into something that sounded like panic. Her shadow doesn't move the way she does. It lags. It lingers. Sometimes when she's not looking at you, her shadow turns its head and watches. I didn't notice for weeks. I didn't want to notice. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once it knows you've seen it. The call ended with a sound like tearing fabric. I sat in that parking lot for an hour, maybe longer. The attendant inside the station glanced at me through the window a few times, his face pale and suspicious under the fluorescent lights. But he didn't come out. No one came out. The world felt empty and full at the same time, as if something enormous were holding its breath just beyond the edge of my perception. I thought about the motel off exit 47. I thought about driving until I ran out of road. I thought about the way my wife had looked at me that morning over breakfast, her eyes tracking my movements with a precision that I'd attributed to love, but now seemed like something else entirely. I went home. I don't know why. Perhaps the voice was right. Perhaps I never trust myself, and that doubt extends to warnings I give to myself from impossible places. Perhaps I simply couldn't accept that my life had become a horror story, that the woman I'd built a future with might be something other than what she appeared. Or perhaps, in some deep and terrible part of myself, I wanted to know. I wanted to see if the shadow moved wrong. The house was warm when I entered. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted from the kitchen, and I could hear the soft clatter of pots, the familiar rhythm of my wife preparing dinner. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was normal. She greeted me with a smile. She asked about my day. I told her it was fine, just busy, and I watched her face for any sign of the thing the voice had described. She looked the same as always, tired around the eyes, beautiful in that comfortable, lived-in way that comes with years of shared space. She touched my arm as she passed, and her skin was warm and human, but her shadow. I tried not to look at it. I tried to focus on the conversation, on the mundane exchange of words that meant nothing and everything at once. But my eyes kept drifting to the wall behind her, where the kitchen light cast her silhouette in sharp relief. It moved with her. Of course it did. Shadows don't have minds of their own, don't have intentions or awareness or the ability to watch. I was being ridiculous. I was letting a series of impossible phone calls dismantle my sense of reality. Then she turned to stir something on the stove, and her shadow stayed facing me for half a second too long. It's such a small thing. Half a second, barely enough time to register, certainly not enough to be certain of what I'd seen. But in that moment, the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop, and I became aware of a smell beneath the garlic and rosemary. Something older, something like earth after rain, mixed with the faint copper tang of old pennies. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer, not there. Not with her watching me with those familiar eyes that suddenly felt like windows into something I didn't understand. I excused myself to wash up for dinner, and I walked to the bathroom on legs that felt borrowed, and I locked the door behind me with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The text message was from my own number. It knows you know. You have until she finishes cooking. Get out. Get out. I'm writing this in the bathroom. I don't know how much time has passed. The sounds from the kitchen have stopped, and there's a silence in the house that feels thick, feels intentional, feels like something waiting to see what I'll do next. I can hear footsteps in the hallway now. Slow, deliberate. They stop outside the bathroom door, and I watch the shadow that seeps through the gap at the bottom. It shouldn't be visible. The hallway light is off. There's no source to cast a shadow. But there it is, dark and shifting and wrong, in ways my mind refuses to process. My phone is ringing again. My own number, calling one last time. I don't know if I should answer. I don't know if the voice on the other end is trying to save me or if it's part of whatever's happening. Whatever has been happening for weeks or months or longer in this house that I thought was safe, with the woman I thought I knew. The doorknob is turning, slowly, testing, and somewhere beneath the silence, I can hear breathing that isn't mine. Story 14. The fluorescent lights in the security booth flicker at 2:47 a.m. They always flicker at 2:47 a.m. I've worked the night shift at St. Augustine Memorial Hospital's parking structure for 11 months now, and I've learned to recognize the rhythms of this place. The hum of the ventilation system that sounds almost like breathing. The way shadows pool in the corners of level 3 where 2 bulbs have been dead since before I started. The particular silence that settles over the concrete labyrinth when visiting hours end and the last stragglers shuffle to their cars. Tonight, the silence feels different, heavier, like the building itself is holding its breath. I lean back in my chair and watch the monitor array, 6 screens showing grainy feeds from cameras scattered throughout the 5-story structure. Nothing moves. The timestamp in the corner reads 2:48:33, the seconds ticking forward with mechanical indifference. I reach for my coffee, cold now, bitter, and that's when the radio crackles to life. Static first, then a voice, distant and distorted, like someone speaking through water. Unit 7. We have a vehicle reported on Level 4, Section D, blue Honda Civic, plate number. The transmission breaks apart into a wash of white noise before cutting out entirely. I frown at the handset. I am Unit 7, but dispatch doesn't call about vehicles at 3 in the morning, and Section D on Level 4 has been closed for renovation since August. Nothing there but dust, plastic sheeting, and the skeletal frames of new light fixtures waiting to be installed. I try to raise dispatch. The radio responds with nothing but static, a soft hiss that sounds almost organic, like the exhalation of something vast and patient. The coffee has turned to acid in my stomach. I tell myself I'm being ridiculous as I grab my flashlight and step out of the booth. The night air is cold and damp, carrying the mineral smell of concrete and something else underneath, something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The parking structure rises above me, a brutalist monument of gray slabs and yellowed lighting. And for a moment I have the irrational sense that it's watching me, that the dark rectangles of the stairwell entrances are eyes, and they're tracking my movement across the empty ground level. I shake off the feeling and head for the elevator. The ride to Level 4 takes longer than it should. I count the seconds. 1, 2, 3, and by the time I reach 15, the car still hasn't passed Level 2. The numbers on the display seem to pulse rather than change, the illumination behind them flickering in a pattern that almost suggests intention. When the doors finally open, the smell hits me first. Exhaust fumes. Fresh ones. But Section D has been closed. There are no cars here. There can't be. I step out into a space that I barely recognize. The plastic sheeting is gone. The exposed framework has vanished. Instead, I'm looking at a fully finished section of parking structure, gleaming under lights that are too bright, too white, casting shadows that fall at angles that don't quite match the geometry of the pillars. And there, sitting in a spot marked D47, is a blue Honda Civic. The engine is running. I approach slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across the concrete even though I don't need it here. The car is older, late 90s maybe, with a faded bumper sticker on the rear window that reads "Baby on Board" in cheerful yellow letters. As I circle to the driver's side, I notice the condensation on the windows, the fog of breath on glass. Someone is inside. I tap on the window with my flashlight and the figure in the driver's seat turns to face me. It's a woman, mid-30s perhaps, with dark hair plastered to her forehead and eyes that are too wide, too desperate. She rolls down the window, manually, the crank squeaking, and her voice comes out ragged, confused. She asked me where she was. She said she'd only pulled in to rest for a moment, that she'd been driving for hours and her eyes were so heavy, and now something was wrong. She could feel it. Something was terribly wrong. She wanted to know if her husband was still waiting in the maternity ward, if it was too late, if she'd missed it. I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat, because I recognized the description. I'd heard about this car. My supervisor had mentioned it once, months ago, in the bored tones of someone sharing local legend. A woman had parked here years ago, 7 or 8 at least, and simply vanished. The car was found running, her purse still on the passenger seat. They searched for weeks. They never found her. The car was towed. The case went cold. But here she was, asking about her husband, asking about a baby that would be walking, talking, starting school by now if it existed at all. I stepped back. She called after me, her voice rising in pitch, but I was already moving, my legs carrying me toward the elevator with a speed that felt like fleeing. Behind me, I heard the car door open. I heard footsteps. I didn't look back. The elevator wouldn't come. I stabbed the button again and again, but the light above the doors remained dark, and the machinery in the shaft stayed silent. The footsteps behind me were getting closer, and with them came that smell again. Flowers in stagnant water, stronger now, cloying. I took the stairs. Level 3, Level 2. My footsteps echoed in the concrete shaft, doubling and tripling until it sounded like a crowd was descending with me. The emergency lighting cast everything in a red-orange glow, and the shadows stretched and contracted in ways that made my head spin. I burst through the door on the ground level and ran for the booth. The radio was waiting for me. Unit 7, we have a vehicle reported on Level 2, Section B, silver Toyota Camry, plate number. I didn't wait for the static to swallow the rest. I was already pulling up the camera feeds, my fingers trembling on the controls. Level 2, Section B. The image was grainy, washed out by the limitations of cheap security cameras, but I could see it clearly enough. A silver car sitting in a spot that had been empty 5 minutes ago. A man standing beside it, looking directly at the camera. He was wearing a suit that looked 20 years out of fashion, and his mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear. I watched as he reached into the car and pulled out a briefcase. Then he started walking. Toward the camera. Toward me. I switched to another feed. Level 2, Section A. He was there now, closer, his face filling more of the frame. His lips were still moving, the same phrase over and over, and even without sound I could read them. Where is everyone? Where did they go? Another switch. Level 1. He was descending, passing through spaces he shouldn't have been able to reach so quickly, and he wasn't alone anymore. Behind him I could see others. The woman from the Civic, and more figures I didn't recognize. All of them walking with that same confused urgency, all of them converging. I reached for the phone to call the main hospital security line, but the receiver was already in my hand before I realized I'd picked it up. The dial tone was wrong, too slow, too low-pitched, like a heart struggling to beat. Through the booth's window, I saw the first of them emerge from the stairwell. There were 7 of them by the time I stopped counting. They moved through the ground level like sleepwalkers, their eyes scanning the empty parking spots, their mouths forming questions that the glass walls of my booth reduced to pantomime. The man in the suit pressed his palm against the window, and I could see that his skin was wrong. Too pale, almost translucent, with veins visible underneath that seemed to pulse with a light of their own. He asked me, his voice somehow audible through the barrier, why no one was answering. He said he'd been trying to find his wife, that she was supposed to be in surgery, that he'd only stepped out for a moment, and now he couldn't find his way back. The year he mentioned was 2003. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I sat there in my chair as they gathered around the booth, their faces pressed to the glass from all sides, their breath fogging the windows until I could barely see the parking structure beyond. They were all talking now, a chorus of confusion and fear, and underneath their voices I could hear something else. A low, thrumming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the building itself was vibrating at a frequency just below perception. The radio crackled again. Unit 7, we have a vehicle reported on Level 5, Section A. White Ford Explorer, plate number. I recognized the description before the static took over. It was my car. My car parked exactly where I'd left it 6 hours ago at the start of my shift. The thrumming grew louder. The lights in the booth began to flicker. 2:47 a.m. rhythm, even though the clock on the wall read 3:33. And the faces at the windows started to blur, to smear, their features running together like wet paint. The man in the suit opened his mouth wide, too wide, and from deep in his throat came a sound that wasn't words, wasn't human, was something that made my vision tunnel and my heart slam against my ribs. And then, silence. I blinked. The windows were clear. The parking structure beyond was empty. The figures were gone. I sat there for a long time, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. When they finally did, I checked the camera feeds. Level 4, Section D, closed for renovations, plastic sheeting and exposed framework, no Honda Civic in sight. Level 2, Section B, empty. The timestamp in the corner read 03:34:12. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. I finished my shift. I clocked out at 7 a.m. when the day guard arrived, a heavy-set man who grunted a greeting and didn't seem to notice anything unusual about my pallor, my trembling, the way I couldn't quite meet his eyes. I walked to level 5, section A. My car was there waiting. I got in. I turned the key. And in the rearview mirror, just for a moment, I saw a face, pale, confused, mouth-forming words I couldn't hear. It was my face. The reflection was wearing my uniform, sitting in my booth, staring at a monitor array. And even though I was behind the wheel, even though I could feel the leather of the seat beneath me and the cold morning air coming through the vents, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one trapped behind glass, that I was the one pressing my palm to the window, asking why no one would answer. The engine idled. The radio sat silent on my belt. I pulled out of the parking spot and drove toward the exit, toward the daylight that was just beginning to creep over the hospital's eastern wall. But as I passed the security booth, I couldn't help but look. The day guard was inside, settling into the chair I'd just left. And behind him, barely visible through the tinted glass, I could see a figure standing in the shadows of the stairwell entrance. A woman. Dark hair. Eyes too wide, too desperate. She was waving. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove out of the parking structure and onto the main road, and I told myself that I would never come back, that I would quit this job and find something else, anything else. But even as I made that promise, I could feel it settling into my bones, the certainty that it wouldn't matter, that the parking structure had already claimed something from me, some essential piece that I wouldn't notice was missing until it was too late. The sun rose. Traffic thickened around me. The world went on, oblivious and indifferent. And in the passenger seat, invisible but undeniable, I felt a presence, watching, waiting, wondering perhaps why I wasn't answering. Story 15. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe. The way shadows pool and stretch in the hours when the world forgets itself. The armchair in the corner of my bedroom had always been there, inherited from my grandmother, its burgundy upholstery worn smooth in patches where countless hands had gripped the armrests. I'd positioned it by the window because I liked reading there on Sunday mornings, liked the way the light fell across my lap in golden slants. But at 3 a.m, there is no golden light. There is only the faint orange glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains, and the shape that sits where no shape should be. I woke with that particular sharpness that comes from being pulled out of sleep by something your body recognizes before your mind does. My eyes opened to the darkness, already adjusted, already looking at the corner. And there it was. A silhouette. Not moving, not breathing, as far as I could tell, just sitting in the armchair, facing me, its outline barely distinguishable from the surrounding dark, but somehow present, in a way that made my throat close. I lay frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably seconds. Then I blinked, hard, and the shape dissolved into ordinary shadow. The armchair was empty. Of course it was empty. I checked my phone. 3:07 a.m. I laughed at myself, a dry sound that scraped against the silence, and went back to sleep. The next night I woke again. Same time, same sharpness, same silhouette. This time I didn't freeze. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs like something trying to escape, and I reached for the lamp on my nightstand. The click of the switch was deafening. Light flooded the room, harsh and yellow, and the armchair was empty. Nothing but worn burgundy fabric and the indentation in the cushion where I'd sat that afternoon. I told myself it was stress. Work had been relentless lately, the kind of pressure that settles into your shoulders and stays there, that wakes you in the night with your jaw clenched so tight your teeth ache. I'd been sleeping poorly for weeks. My wife had mentioned it over breakfast one morning, her eyes soft with concern as she asked if I wanted to see someone, talk to someone. I'd waved her off. Everyone has trouble sleeping sometimes. But the silhouette came back. Every night. Always at 3. Always watching. I started keeping a notebook by the bed. I'm not sure why. Maybe I thought if I documented it, I could prove to myself it wasn't real. Or maybe I was trying to prove the opposite. The entries grew stranger as the weeks passed. 3:02 a.m., shape and chair, didn't move, watched for 4 minutes before light. Then, 3:00 a.m. exactly, shape larger tonight, edges less defined, couldn't find lamp switch for 10 seconds, hands shaking. And later, 2:58 a.m., woke before it appeared, watched the chair. At 3 o'clock, the shadows shifted, gathered, like something pulling itself together. My wife began sleeping in the guest room. She said I was thrashing in my sleep, talking, crying out. She said I'd grabbed her arm one night so hard I left bruises. I don't remember any of this. I only remember waking at 3 every night to that silent shape in the corner. The worst part wasn't the fear. Fear I could handle. The worst part was the doubt. I began to watch myself from a distance, cataloging my own symptoms like a doctor examining a patient he suspects of malingering. Was I losing my mind? Had I already lost it? I started noticing things during the day. Small things, wrong things. The coffee mug I always placed on the left side of my desk appearing on the right. The books on my nightstand rearranged into a different order. The armchair itself, which I could have sworn faced the window, now angled slightly toward the bed. Toward me. I mentioned none of this to my wife. She was already looking at me differently, with that careful expression people wear when they're calculating risk. I overheard her on the phone one evening, speaking to someone in a low voice. Her mother, maybe, or one of her friends. The words that drifted to me were, "not himself," and "worried," and "professional help." I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, listening, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, something worse, certainty. She didn't believe me. She thought I was sick. Maybe I was. I started staying awake past 3. I reasoned that if I never fell asleep, I could never wake to the silhouette. I'd sit in bed with all the lights on, reading or staring at my phone, watching the minutes crawl past. 2:45, 2:50, 2:55, and then, inevitably, I would blink, and it would be 3 o'clock, and the lights would be off. When had I turned them off? And the shape would be there, sitting, watching, waiting. The sleep deprivation made everything worse. Colors seemed too bright during the day, sounds too loud. I jumped at shadows, at movement in my peripheral vision. My colleague asked if I was feeling all right, and I heard myself say yes, perfectly fine, even as my hands trembled around my coffee cup. The face in the bathroom mirror looked back at me with hollowed eyes and cheeks that had thinned without my noticing. I barely recognized myself. One night, I don't know which night anymore, they'd all begun to blur together. I decided to do something different. Instead of lying in bed paralyzed, I would confront it. I would walk to the armchair and touch it. Prove to myself there was nothing there. I woke at 3 o'clock. The silhouette was waiting. I made myself move. My legs felt distant, disconnected from my body, but I forced them to swing over the side of the bed and plant themselves on the floor. The carpet was cold against my bare feet, colder than it should have been. I stood. The shape didn't move. I took one step, then another. The distance between my bed and the armchair was perhaps 10 feet, but it stretched before me like a corridor in a nightmare, elongating with each step. I was 5 feet away when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, then stronger. Old fabric, dust, and beneath that, something else. Something organic and sweetly rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The smell of decay without the source. The smell of something that had been waiting a very long time. 3 feet away. I could see it more clearly now, or thought I could. The silhouette had a shape, a form, though I couldn't make out features. It was roughly human in proportion, sitting with its hands on the armrests, its head tilted slightly to one side, as if listening, as if curious. 2 feet. 1. I reached out my hand. The moment my fingers touched the fabric of the armchair, The silhouette was gone. Not dissolved, not faded. Gone. As if it had never been there. My hand met only empty cushion, worn smooth by years of use. I stood alone in my bedroom, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the armchair myself, facing the bed, watching the empty sheets. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself I was testing a theory. But what I was really doing, I think, was trying to understand what it felt like to be the one watching. The chair was warm, not the warmth of my body heat sinking into the cushions, a different warmth, older, already present when I sat down, as if someone had been sitting there just before me. My wife left 3 days later. She didn't say it was because of me, not directly. She talked about needing space, about her sister's new apartment, about how we both needed time to think. But I saw the way she avoided looking at the bedroom door. I saw the way she flinched when I reached for her. She took a suitcase and her laptop and promised to call. She didn't call. Alone in the house, the nights grew longer. The silhouette kept appearing, but something had changed. It seemed closer each time. The first night after my wife left, it was in the armchair as always. The second night, it was at the foot of the bed. The third, beside my nightstand. Each time I woke, it was nearer, though I never saw it move. It was simply there, in a new position, as if it had always been there, as if my memories were wrong. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I tried the couch in the living room, but I woke at 3 to see a shape in the recliner across from me. I tried the guest room, but the silhouette found me there too, seated on the edge of the spare bed, close enough that I could have touched it if I dared to reach out. There was no escaping it. The shape had imprinted itself onto my nights, had become as inevitable as the turning of the clock. I started researching. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, stress-induced psychosis. I read case studies in medical journals until my vision blurred, until the words stopped making sense. Everything I read told me the same thing. What I was experiencing wasn't real. It was my brain misfiring, creating patterns where none existed, populating the darkness with fears I couldn't name. The rational part of me accepted this. The rational part of me knew I needed to see a doctor, take medication, tell someone before I lost myself completely. But there was another part of me, growing louder by the day, that asked a different question. If the silhouette wasn't real, why did the armchair cushion have a depression in it every morning? Why did I smell that sweet, rotten smell even in daylight? Why did the dust on the armrests show the marks of fingers that weren't mine? I began to doubt everything. My wife's departure, my colleagues' concern, the face in the mirror that looked less like me every day. What if the silhouette was the only real thing left? What if I was the hallucination, the trick of the light, the shape that didn't belong? Last night I didn't wake at 3 o'clock. I was already awake, sitting in the armchair waiting. The clock on my nightstand glowed green in the darkness. 2:58, 2:59, 3:00. Nothing happened. The room remained empty. No silhouette, no presence. Just me, alone, in a chair that smelled of old fabric and something sweetly dead. I sat there until dawn, watching the light change, watching the shadows retreat. And when I finally looked at myself, really looked, in the mirror, hanging on the closet door, I noticed something I hadn't before. The angle of my head, tilted slightly to one side, the way my hands gripped the armrests, the stillness of my body, the absence of breath. I looked exactly like the silhouette had looked. Every night. All along. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over my chest, cold and final. I understood now. The silhouette hadn't been visiting me. It had been waiting for me to become it, to take its place, to sit in the chair and watch the empty bed where I used to sleep. I don't know how long I've been sitting here. The clock says it's afternoon, but the light seems wrong. Too dim, too orange, like the glow of a street lamp filtered through curtains. My wife's number is in my phone. I could call her. I could call someone. But my hands don't want to move from the armrests, and the cushion beneath me is so warm, and the smell of decay has become almost pleasant, almost familiar, almost like home. Tonight, at 3 o'clock, someone will wake in this house. Maybe me, maybe someone else, and they'll see a shape in the armchair, watching, waiting, tilting its head to one side. I wonder if they'll reach out to touch it. I wonder if they'll recognize who it used to be. Story 16. It started 3 weeks ago, on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays are when my wife works the night shift at the hospital, and I was alone in our apartment for the first time since we moved in. The bedroom felt different without her, larger somehow, the shadows pooling in corners I'd never noticed before. I fell asleep around 11, exhausted from unpacking boxes that seemed to multiply no matter how many I emptied. At exactly midnight, I woke up. Not gradually, the way you surface from a dream, but instantly. Eyes open, heart already pounding, every nerve singing with the certainty that something was wrong. The blanket was sliding off the bed, slowly, steadily, as if someone beneath the mattress had taken hold of its edge and was pulling it toward the floor with deliberate, patient intent. I yanked it back, told myself it was gravity, the silk duvet slipping against the cotton sheets, told myself I was being ridiculous. But I didn't sleep again that night. I lay there until dawn bled through the curtains, watching the blanket, waiting for it to move. It didn't. The second night I stayed awake on purpose. I sat up against the headboard with the lamp on, a book open in my lap that I wasn't reading. At 11:47, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. At 11:52, the lamp flickered, just once, a brief stutter of light that made the shadows jump. At 11:58, I heard something. A sound beneath the bed, not scratching, not breathing. Something worse. A slow, wet drag, like flesh sliding across hardwood, like something repositioning itself in the dark space between the floor and the box spring. I held my breath, counted the seconds on the alarm clock's red display. 12 o'clock. The blanket moved. This time, I didn't pull it back. I watched it slide, inch by inch, corner first, until it hung halfway off the mattress, suspended at an angle that defied physics. Gravity would have dropped it to the floor. Instead, it hovered there, taut, as if something held it from below. Then it released. The fabric pooled on the hardwood with a soft whisper, and the apartment fell silent. I didn't look under the bed. I couldn't. Some instinct older than reason told me that looking would make it real, would acknowledge whatever waited in that darkness and give it permission to emerge. So I sat there, trembling, until my wife came home at 7 in the morning and found me still awake, still staring at the floor. She asked if I was okay. I told her I'd had a nightmare. She kissed my forehead and said I felt warm. Maybe I was coming down with something. I agreed, because it was easier than explaining what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I was beginning to suspect. The third night I tried sleeping in the living room. The couch was uncomfortable, too short for my frame, but I convinced myself it was better than the bedroom, safer. I left the television on for company, some late-night program murmuring about kitchen appliances, and I closed my eyes. At midnight, I woke to find the blanket from the bedroom draped over me. I hadn't brought it. I was certain of that. I'd deliberately left it on the bed, a test of sorts, wanting to know if the phenomenon was tied to the blanket itself or to me. Now it covered me from chest to toe, still warm, still carrying the faint scent of fabric softener and something else, something organic and unplaceable, like wet soil or old copper. I threw it off. It landed on the floor, and I could have sworn I saw it twitch. Just a small movement, a subtle shifting of fabric that might have been a trick of the television's flickering light. Might have been. I gathered it up and stuffed it in the hall closet, buried it beneath winter coats and forgotten luggage. Then I went back to the couch and lay there with my eyes open, watching the closet door, counting my heartbeats until morning. A week passed. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom entirely. My wife noticed, of course. She asked why I was always on the couch when she came home, why there were circles under my eyes, why I flinched when she mentioned the bed. I told her I was having trouble adjusting to the new apartment. The mattress was too soft. The room got too hot at night. Excuses that tasted like lies but weren't. Not entirely. She suggested I see a doctor. I agreed to make an appointment, knowing I never would. What would I tell them? That something under my bed was pulling the blankets at midnight? That I was afraid to sleep in my own bedroom because of a sound I couldn't describe and a presence I couldn't prove? They would medicate me, diagnose me with stress or anxiety or some sleep disorder with a clinical name. They would tell me what I was experiencing wasn't real, and I would nod and take their pills and pretend to believe them. But I knew better. I knew that medication couldn't fix what was happening, because what was happening existed outside the boundaries of chemistry and neurology. It existed in the darkness beneath my bed, waiting, always waiting. The second week, I started noticing other things, small discrepancies, wrong details that my mind kept snagging on like fabric caught on a nail. The bedroom door, which I always closed, standing open in the morning. The sheets on the bed rearranged in patterns I hadn't made, geometric, almost deliberate, as if something had been organizing them according to a logic I couldn't understand. The faint impression on my wife's pillow, visible when the light hit it just right, shaped like a head but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, tapering to a point where a chin should be. I asked my wife if she'd been sleeping in the bed during the day, and she looked at me strangely and said, "No, she'd been at work, didn't I remember?" I remembered. I just needed to hear her say it, needed confirmation that the impressions and arrangements weren't her doing, weren't human. The apartment began to feel hostile. Not haunted. That word implied something ancient, something with history and motive. This felt different, newer, hungry, as if the space itself had developed an awareness, an appetite, and I was the only one who could sense it. My wife moved through the rooms without hesitation, blind to the wrongness that pressed against my skin like humidity before a storm. She showered with the bathroom door open, slept with her back to the bedroom's shadowed corners, left her feet dangling off the edge of the mattress without fear. I watched her and felt a jealousy so profound it bordered on despair. She belonged to a world where beds were just furniture, where midnight was just a time, where darkness held nothing but the absence of light. I no longer lived in that world. By the third week I had stopped pretending. I slept on the couch every night, wrapped in a thin throw blanket that I kept draped over the back during the day. I never brought the bedroom blanket out of the closet, though sometimes I could hear it rustling in there. Soft sounds, barely audible, like whispered conversation in a language I didn't recognize. My wife and I argued. She said I was scaring her, that I looked gaunt and pale, that I talked to myself when I thought she wasn't listening. I wanted to tell her everything, to describe the pulling and the sounds and the terrible certainty that something had taken up residence in our home, but the words wouldn't come. They lodged in my throat like stones, and all I could do was apologize and promise to try harder, to sleep better, to be normal. But normal was a country I'd been exiled from, and I couldn't find my way back. Last night I made a decision. I was going to look. After 3 weeks of avoidance, 3 weeks of mounting dread and deteriorating sanity, I was going to kneel beside the bed and look beneath it and confront whatever waited there. Because not knowing was worse than any horror I could imagine. Not knowing was a kind of death in itself, a slow erasure of everything I'd been before that first Thursday night. My wife was working. The apartment was dark except for the bedroom, where I'd turned on every light, the overhead fixture, the bedside lamps, even the closet bulb. I stood at the foot of the bed and counted backward from 10, giving myself time to change my mind. I didn't. I got down on my hands and knees. The hardwood was cold against my palms, smooth and unyielding. I lowered my head, pressed my cheek to the floor, and looked into the space beneath the bed. Nothing. Empty darkness. Empty. Dust bunnies drifting in the disturbed air. The underside of the box spring, fabric sagging slightly in the center. Nothing hiding, nothing waiting, nothing at all. I laughed, a short, broken sound, and felt something loosen in my chest. Relief, vindication, proof that I'd been wrong, that my mind had invented a monster where none existed, that I could return to the normal world and sleep in my own bed again. I started to rise, and then I saw my reflection in the window across the room. I was still kneeling beside the bed, still looking at the empty space beneath it, but in the reflection, something was looking back. A shape in the darkness under the mattress, pale, elongated, with features I couldn't make out but somehow recognized. It was watching the reflected me with an intensity that made my stomach clench, its posture hungry and patient and utterly terribly still. I didn't move, couldn't move. I kept my eyes on the window, on the reflection that showed what the real room refused to reveal. The shape shifted slightly, and I saw its arm extend. Long, too long, jointed in places arms shouldn't bend, and its fingers close around the edge of the blanket. In the reflection, it began to pull. I felt the fabric slide across my legs. I don't know how long I knelt there, trapped between two realities. One empty, one occupied, watching myself being claimed by something that existed only in mirrors, in reflections, in the spaces between what is seen and what is real. Eventually, the shape retreated. The blanket settled. The reflection became ordinary again, showing only a man on his knees beside a bed, looking at nothing. I'm on the couch now, writing this down because I need a record. Evidence. Something to prove to myself tomorrow that tonight actually happened. That I'm not simply losing my mind in the most predictable way imaginable. My wife will be home in a few hours. She'll find me here, like always. And she'll ask if I'm okay. And I'll say yes, because that's what we do. We say yes even when the answer is no. Even when the answer is, I don't know anymore. The thing under the bed is real. I know that now. But it's not under the bed in any way I can prove or show or share. It exists in the reflection, in the peripheral, in the moment between waking and sleeping when reality softens and other things seep through. I can hear the closet rustling again. The blanket, moving in its burial shroud of winter coats. Calling to me maybe, or calling to something else. It's 11:47. I should try to sleep. I know I won't, but I should try. That's what normal people do. They close their eyes and trust the darkness, trust that morning will come, and the night's horrors will dissolve in daylight like fog. I used to be one of them. 11:52. The lamp just flickered.